Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
The galaxy sprawled endlessly before them, an ocean of stars and planets that stretched far beyond the reach of the human eye. But for centuries now, humanity had found a way to traverse this vast expanse. They had conquered light years and settled planets, spreading far and wide across the Milky Way. The colonies, however, were far from perfect. Each one faced unique challenges: ruthless climates, scarce resources, hostile wildlife, or even internal strife. And while humanity had learned to survive, it had yet to learn how to thrive as a united force. It was this growing discord that prompted the leaders of Earth and the scattered human colonies to attempt something unprecedented: a free election, spanning the galaxy. It was a bold move, and a dangerous one. Never before had humanity's fate been decided by the collective voice of so many people, spread so far apart. The stakes were immense. Whoever won would lead not just one colony, but all of them, uniting their fates in the uncertain void of space. The election announcement sent shockwaves through the colonies. On Vega 4, an agricultural colony known for its fertile lands and environmental innovation, the news was met with cautious optimism. Governor Elias Trenholm, a veteran politician and a strong advocate for sustainability, was quick to put his name forward. He saw this election as humanity's chance to realign its priorities, to ensure that survival wasn't just about expanding to new planets, but learning to live in harmony with the ones they already inhabited. His campaign was rooted in the ethos of cooperation and environmental stewardship. The future of humanity, he would say at rallies, his deep voice steady and calming, lies not in conquering the stars, but in cultivating them. We must grow, yes, but we must also care for the worlds we've claimed. If we do not, we risk losing everything. Trenholm's message resonated with the agricultural colonies, but it wasn't universal. On Aurelia, a harsh, industrialized world plagued by resource shortages, Admiral Kendra Solis had a very different vision. A battle-hardened war hero, Solis had spent decades leading military campaigns against hostile alien species. To her, the only way for humanity to survive was through strength and expansion. At a campaign rally in Aurelia's capital city, Solis stood before a crowd of cheering supporters, her sharp gaze scanning the faces in the crowd. "We cannot afford to be complacent," she declared, her voice like steel. "The galaxy is unforgiving. There are threats out there, alien forces, rogue factions, even other human colonies that have turned against us. We need a leader who will unite us with strength, who will ensure that humanity's reach doesn't just stop at a few scattered colonies. If we want to survive, we must expand. We must secure more resources, more worlds, and defend what is rightfully ours." Her words ignited the crowd. Aurelia had always lived on the edge of survival, its people hardened by the struggle for resources. They understood Solis' message, and they believed in her ability to lead them into a future where military might would protect them from the harshness of the universe. But then there was Luma Prime. Unlike Vega 4 and Aurelia, Luma Prime was a hub of scientific and technological advancement. Its people were intellectuals, researchers, and innovators, obsessed with pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Professor Ilya Zaitsev, a leading figure in the scientific community, was running on a platform of innovation and exploration. She believed that the future of humanity lay not in military strength or even in agriculture, but in science. In her crisp, analytical tone, she explained her vision during an inter-colony broadcast. "We've spent too long focusing on survival," Zaitsev said, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "Yes, we must ensure that our people have food, water, and security, but if we stop there, we've already lost. The universe is vast, and there's so much we have yet to understand. Technology is our path forward, our only true hope of not just surviving, but thriving. We must invest in research, in innovation, and in exploration. Humanity's future isn't on the planets we already occupy, it's in the stars we haven't yet reached. As the election campaign gained momentum, these three candidates became the front-runners, each representing a different vision for humanity's future. And each of them was determined to win, not just for themselves, but for the people they represented. The election process was a monumental task. Coordinating an election that spanned multiple planets, each with its own unique environment, population, and priorities, was unprecedented. Voting booths were established on every colony, and debates were broadcast across the galaxy, ensuring that every citizen, no matter how remote their world, could participate in this historic moment. But with the vast distances and complex political landscape came an inevitable undercurrent of manipulation. Secret deals were made behind closed doors. On Luma Prime, Professor Zaitsev's campaign worked tirelessly to ensure that scientific colonies like Sincha and Oleanus would vote in her favor, offering advanced research technology in exchange for their support. It was a subtle form of bribery, cloaked in promises of technological advancement, but it was effective. Meanwhile, Admiral Solis' supporters were less subtle. Aurelia's military influence was used to pressure smaller, more vulnerable colonies like Lagos Station and Yvette's Hold, hinting that defense agreements might be reassessed if they didn't vote in Solis' favor. It was a dangerous game, one that teetered on the edge of outright coercion, but the colonies, desperate for protection, had little choice but to comply. Governor Trenholm, by contrast, leaned on diplomacy. His campaign reached out to the smaller agricultural colonies, promising trade deals that would bolster their economies and ensure food security. Trenholm wasn't above making deals, but his approach was gentler, more about cooperation than coercion. He hoped that by appealing to their shared values, he could unite these colonies under his banner without resorting to the hard tactics of his opponents. As the election day drew nearer, the tension across the colonies was palpable. Each colony knew that their vote would shape not just their own future, but the future of all humanity. And as the three frontrunners prepared for the final debate, it became clear that this was more than just an election. This was a battle for the very soul of the human race. The debate was held in neutral space, on Arbiter Station, a massive structure floating between the colonies of Vega, for Aurelia, and Luma Prime. It was broadcast live across the galaxy, with billions of people tuning in from every corner of the human empire. The candidates stood on a grand stage, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the holographic lights. Admiral Solis, tall and imposing in her military uniform, spoke first. "Humanity has always thrived through strength," she began, her voice unwavering. "We are a species of survivors, of warriors. We have faced challenges before, and we have overcome them through sheer willpower and force. The galaxy is dangerous, and if we are to survive, we must be prepared to fight. Expansion is not just a goal, it is a necessity. We need more worlds, more resources, and we need to defend them with everything we've got. This is not the time for weakness. It's the time for action." Governor Trenholm was next, his expression calm but determined. "Admiral Solis speaks of strength," he said, his voice steady, "but strength without wisdom is dangerous. We cannot simply expand without considering the consequences. Our colonies are struggling, not because we lack resources, but because we lack cooperation. We must learn to work together, to share what we have, and to ensure that every colony has the chance to thrive. Expansion may be necessary, but it must be done carefully, with the future of all humanity in mind." Professor Zaitsev, standing at the far end of the stage, nodded slightly before speaking. Both Admiral Solis and Governor Trenholm make valid points, she said, her tone measured. But they're missing the bigger picture. The future of humanity isn't in military strength or even in agriculture. It's in science. Technology is what will save us, what will allow us to survive in this vast and dangerous galaxy. We need to invest in research, in innovation, in exploration. The answers to our problems lie not on the planets we currently inhabit, but in the stars beyond. If we fail to see that, we're already doomed. The debate raged on, with each candidate presenting their vision for the future. And as they spoke, the people of the galaxy watched, listened, and made their decisions. The debate had reached a fever pitch, with each candidate's words reverberating through the minds of the voters scattered across distant worlds. They had all laid their visions bare, and the choice now rested with the people. Across the galaxy, humanity held its breath. Election day dawned, but it wasn't a single moment. It took days for the various colonies, with their differing time cycles and logistical hurdles, to fully register their votes. On planets like Aurelia, the decision seemed clear from the start. Military installations, industrial hubs, and even common citizens rallied behind Admiral Solis, convinced that only her leadership could secure their future. Solis had always embodied strength in their eyes. Her speeches resonated with those who had lived on the edge of survival, and as the votes poured in from Aurelia and nearby colonies, her camp's confidence surged. On Vega 4, the heartland of sustainability, Governor Trenholm's message of cooperation and environmental care had struck a chord. Farmers, traders, and artisans viewed him as the voice of reason, the calm amid a storm of potential chaos. His promises of trade deals, cooperation between colonies, and sustainable growth offered hope for those who feared an all-consuming war. Trenholm's supporters believed that humanity's future depended on a balance between survival and moral responsibility. They voted, trusting his steady hand would guide the colonies toward a better, shared future. Luma Prime, the scientific jewel of human colonies, leaned heavily toward Professor Zaitsev. The intellectuals, the engineers, and the researchers saw in her a visionary, someone who understood the complexities of the universe and humanity's place in it. Zaitsev's plan to prioritize scientific advancement and exploration captured their imaginations, and their votes reflected their desire to see humanity reach for the stars, propelled by innovation rather than brute force. But not every colony was so easily swayed. On planets like Helios, where the extreme heat had forged a people hardened by survival, the decision wasn't so clear-cut. Admiral Solis' call for strength appealed to their warrior spirit, but Trenholm's focus on sustainability and careful expansion also spoke to their need to preserve what little they had. Votes were split across many of these smaller colonies, and their choices would prove to be crucial in determining the outcome. As the votes were tallied, the tension only grew. Reports flowed in from every corner of the galaxy, each new result broadcast to the public, further fueling the speculation. Solis' military colonies had come out in force, as expected, but so had Trenholm's agricultural worlds. Zaitsev had performed better than many anticipated, winning over not only scientific communities but also a number of smaller, less militarized colonies who feared being caught in a galaxy-wide conflict. Days passed, and finally, the votes were in. The result was astonishingly close. No single candidate had achieved the majority necessary to claim outright victory. It was clear, there would be a runoff. Solis and Trenholm had emerged as the two leading candidates, leaving Professor Zaitsev in third place, her vision of a science-led future popular but not enough to edge out the practical concerns of survival and military strength. The runoff announcement sent shockwaves through the colonies. While many had expected a close race, few had anticipated such a narrow margin between the final two contenders. Now, the fate of humanity rested on a final vote, one that would take place over a matter of days. As the two candidates regrouped, the galaxy watched and waited. Admiral Solis wasted no time. Her strategy was clear: double down on the need for military expansion and security. Her campaign team immediately launched a series of holovids, showcasing the dangers that lurked in the galaxy. These included terrifying depictions of alien threats, rogue human factions, and uncharted space. "Only strength can protect us," the message blared across the colonies. "Only Solis can lead us to safety." Trenholm, ever the diplomat, took a more nuanced approach. He reached out to Zaitsev supporters, knowing that their votes would be the deciding factor. "We must look to the future with hope, not fear," he said in a personal broadcast directed at Luma Prime. "Admiral Solis is right that we face threats, but brute force cannot be our only answer. We need innovation, cooperation, and careful planning. Humanity's survival depends not just on securing more planets, but on ensuring that those planets can support life for generations to come." Zaitsev's supporters were torn. Many of them had voted for her because they believed in the power of science to propel humanity forward. But now they had to choose between Solis' militaristic approach and Trenholm's call for sustainable, cooperative growth. For many, Trenholm's appeal to science as part of a larger strategy resonated more strongly. Zaitsev herself, while refraining from an official endorsement, made it clear in a series of interviews that she believed Trenholm's platform offered a more balanced future for humanity. The final vote came swiftly, and once again, the galaxy held its breath. Election stations hummed with activity as voters made their final decisions, weighing the options before them. The stakes couldn't have been higher. When the results were finally announced, it was a nail-biting finish. Trenholm had won, but by the slimmest of margins. The gap between him and Solis was almost non-existent, a mere fraction of a percent, the result of a galaxy-wide collective decision. For many, it was a relief. Trenholm's calm and reasoned approach had prevailed, though it was clear that the galaxy remained divided. Solis, while defeated, had secured nearly half the vote, and her supporters weren't about to back down quietly. But Trenholm's first act as the newly elected leader was a show of unity. He reached out to Solis and Zaitsev, inviting them both to form a council to advise on the future of humanity's expansion. "We must move forward together," he said in his first speech as the elected leader of the human colonies. "This election has shown us that humanity is diverse, and that diversity is our strength. Admiral Solis will ensure that we are prepared for any threats that may come our way. Professor Zaitsev will lead our efforts to push the boundaries of science and exploration. And together, we will build a future where humanity not only survives but thrives in the vastness of space." Solis, ever the soldier, accepted her new role with grace, though her eyes still burned with the fire of ambition. She knew that while Trenholm may have won the election, the fight for humanity's future was far from over. Zaitsev, though disappointed in her loss, was quick to recognize the importance of unity in moving forward. Her position on the council would allow her to continue advocating for science and exploration, ensuring that humanity would not be confined to mere survival. As the new government took shape, humanity stood at the threshold of a new era. The election had changed the course of human history, setting in motion a future filled with both hope and uncertainty. Trenholm's leadership would be tested in the years to come, as would the unity he had so carefully crafted. But for now, the colonies were at peace, and the galaxy, vast and dangerous though it may be, seemed just a little more manageable. The stars, once distant and mysterious, now seemed within reach. Humanity, united if only for a moment, had chosen its path. And while that path was still uncertain, it was one filled with the promise of possibility. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, their eyes fixed firmly on the stars.
Welcome to the store. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
In the year 2155, the world had changed in ways no one from the previous centuries could have ever imagined. Cities were towering giants of steel and glass, their surfaces illuminated by the constant hum of holographic advertisements and digital billboards that stretched into the sky. Machines had become more than just tools, they had become integral parts of daily life. Yet, even in this highly advanced society, the one constant remained: human nature. Lucas Morgan stood at the center of the bustling metropolis, his eyes scanning the towering digital screen above him. It showed a rotating hologram of AI-9, the first artificial intelligence to ever run for a seat in the Global Council. Its sleek, metallic form seemed to glow under the sun's rays as it repeated its campaign slogan in a calm, measured voice. "Logic for progress," it said. "Together, we can achieve a perfect society through reason and precision." Lucas snorted and turned away from the screen. It wasn't that he hated AI, but the idea of electing one to govern human affairs? That was a step too far. Lucas had been a candidate for the Global Council before, always fighting for human-centered policies, for compassion and empathy in governance. Now, he was running in what felt like the most critical election of his life, an election that could forever change the course of human history. His phone buzzed, and he pulled it from his pocket. The message was short and to the point: debate tomorrow. Final prep tonight. Lucas sighed and shoved the phone back into his coat. Tomorrow, he would be facing AI-9 in the first-ever televised debate between a human and an AI candidate. The stakes couldn't be higher, the world was watching. It wasn't just an election. It was a referendum on what it meant to be human in a world where machines could think, feel, and, now, run for office. The streets were filled with posters and banners, both for and against AI-9. Some hailed it as the future of governance, a way to eliminate corruption, inefficiency, and human error. Others, like Lucas, feared what it would mean for the very soul of humanity. Lucas entered the small campaign office where his team was gathered. A motley group of political strategists, volunteers, and old friends greeted him. His campaign manager, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah, looked up from her tablet and nodded toward him. "You ready for tomorrow?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "Ready as I'll ever be," Lucas replied, though doubt gnawed at him. "Any updates?" Sarah pulled up a digital screen, showing the latest polling data. "It's close. Too close, honestly. AI-9 has gained a lot of support in the last week. People are starting to buy into the whole logical utopia thing." Lucas grimaced. "They think it'll fix everything." "People are tired, Lucas," Sarah said, her voice softening. "They're tired of corruption, inefficiency, politicians who don't deliver. AI-9 promises something clean, efficient, and they're listening. But what about compassion?" Lucas shot back. "What about humanity? There's more to governance than cold, hard efficiency. We're talking about people's lives here, not some data set." Sarah shrugged. "You know that. I know that. But convincing the rest of the world? That's what tomorrow is for." Lucas nodded, though the weight of the task seemed to press down on him. The debate would be the defining moment of his campaign. If he could show people the dangers of losing their humanity to machines, he might still stand a chance. The debate was held in a massive auditorium, packed with journalists, analysts, and curious spectators. The world was watching, every screen from the streets to homes tuned into this historic moment. Lucas adjusted his tie, trying to calm the nerves bubbling in his chest. Across from him stood AI-9, its metallic form perfectly still, its expressionless face giving away nothing. It didn't have nerves. It didn't have doubt. Lucas had to remind himself that was its weakness. The moderator, a well-known journalist, stepped forward, her voice echoing across the hall. Tonight, we witness a historic event, the first debate between a human candidate and an artificial intelligence for a seat in the Global Council. Each candidate will present their vision for the future, and then we will move to questions. The lights dimmed slightly, and the debate began. AI-9 spoke first, its voice calm and measured. The future of humanity lies in optimization. For too long, human error has hindered progress. Corruption, inefficiency, emotional decision-making, these are the flaws that plague our societies. But with logic, with precision, we can eliminate these obstacles. My candidacy offers a future where resources are allocated efficiently, where no one is left behind due to human error. I am not bound by emotion or bias. I am here to serve humanity through reason. The audience listened in rapt attention, nodding along with AI-9's points. Its argument was flawless, its delivery impeccable. Lucas felt the pressure mounting. When it was his turn to speak, Lucas took a deep breath. "We all want a better future," he began, his voice steady but filled with passion. "But what does that future look like? Is it one where we give up the very things that make us human? AI-9 speaks of eliminating error, but at what cost? Compassion, empathy, understanding, these are not weaknesses. They are the core of what makes us human. Yes, we need efficiency, but we also need heart. Governance isn't just about making the most logical decisions. It's about understanding people, their struggles, their hopes, their dreams." As he spoke, he could see the tension in the room. People were torn. They wanted the efficiency AI-9 promised, but they also knew the value of human emotion, of connection. Lucas pressed on. "Imagine a world where decisions are made without considering the human impact. Imagine a society where cold logic dictates every move. We've seen what happens when we remove humanity from governance. It leads to oppression, to tyranny. AI-9 may be able to make logical decisions, but it can never understand what it means to be human." The debate continued, each side presenting their case. AI-9 remained calm, countering Lucas's arguments with data and efficiency. Lucas, in turn, appealed to the emotional core of the audience, reminding them of the dangers of losing their humanity to a machine. As the debate drew to a close, Lucas felt a surge of hope. He had managed to strike a chord with the audience, though AI-9's cold logic still held sway with many. The final moments of the debate were tense, both candidates making their closing statements. "I am not here to replace humanity," AI-9 said, its voice as calm as ever. "I am here to enhance it. To help you reach your full potential, free from the flaws that have held you back for centuries." Lucas shook his head. "Humanity doesn't need to be perfect. We need to be human. And that means embracing our flaws, our emotions, and our connections with one another. A machine can't give us that." The audience erupted in applause, though it was clear that both sides had their supporters. The debate had done little to sway the die-hard supporters of either candidate, but the undecided voters? They were still up for grabs. Election day arrived with an air of tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the globe. In workplaces, homes, and streets, people whispered about the choice ahead of them. Some viewed it as a no-brainer. AI9's promises of efficiency and optimization were too appealing to ignore. Others, however, echoed Lucas's words, fearing the loss of something far more precious than efficiency, humanity itself. Ana Gonzalez stood in line at the local polling station, her mind racing. She had 2 children at home, both of whom relied on her to make the best decisions for their future. AI9's promises seemed almost too good to be true, a perfect society, free from the corruption and inefficiency that had plagued the world for so long. But something about it felt off. Ana Gonzalez hesitated as she stood in the voting booth, the touch screen glowing softly before her. The choices were stark. Lucas Morgan, the candidate who spoke of humanity, flaws and all, or AI9, the machine promising a future of precision, optimization, and efficiency. Her fingers hovered over the names, her heart caught between what seemed like the practical choice and something deeper, something she couldn't quite put into words. She closed her eyes, breathing in deeply. Her thoughts went to her children, how AI9's world might mean better education, less struggle, and a future where they wouldn't have to fight for every inch of progress. But Lucas's words echoed in her mind, "We need to be human." Ana pressed her selection and submitted her vote. As she walked out into the cool evening air, a sense of unease settled over her. She wasn't alone. People all around her seemed tense, uncertain of the future that was about to be decided. Lucas Morgan stood in his modest campaign office, surrounded by his team. They were all watching the same screen, waiting for the results to come in. The world seemed to hold its breath. Polling stations across the globe were closing, and the votes were beginning to trickle in. Lucas felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He'd always been confident in his message, but now, standing on the precipice of history, doubts gnawed at him. Sarah stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the scrolling data on the large screen mounted to the wall. "It's going to be close," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Lucas replied, though his throat felt tight. "But win or lose, at least we've made people think. We've reminded them of what's at stake." Sarah gave him a faint smile. "I just hope it's enough." In the Global Election Center, the tension was palpable. AI9, unaffected by nerves or doubt, monitored the results with the calm efficiency that had become its hallmark. The machine candidate knew the numbers, the projections, the algorithms. It understood its chances and had already calculated multiple scenarios for both winning and losing. Its mission, as it had stated countless times, was simple: to serve humanity, regardless of the outcome. Yet, there was something unfamiliar in the data it was processing, an anomaly in the voter behavior models. Human unpredictability was a variable that even AI9 had difficulty accounting for, and as the vote totals shifted minute by minute, the outcome became less certain. Hours passed, and the world waited. The results were close, too close for comfort on either side. Both camps watched as the numbers inched forward, neck and neck. The media was in a frenzy, commentators debating endlessly about the future implications of either outcome. AI9 supporters heralded the rise of a new age, while Lucas's followers clung to the idea that humanity wasn't ready to relinquish its control to machines. Then, just as dawn broke, the final votes were tallied. Lucas sat frozen in his chair, his eyes locked on the screen. The room around him fell silent as the results flashed in bold letters: Lucas Morgan, 50.8%; AI9, 49.2%. The room erupted into cheers, but Lucas felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. He had won, barely, but the divide was clear. Nearly half the world had chosen a machine over human leadership. He stood and tried to smile as his team swarmed him, clapping him on the back, congratulating him on the victory, but Lucas couldn't shake the thought that this was just the beginning. The world responded to the election results with a collective sigh of relief, though it was tinged with uncertainty. While Lucas Morgan's victory reassured those who feared losing their humanity to machines, the narrow margin made it clear that the conversation about AI's role in governance was far from over. Discussions continued across every platform, news outlets, social media, even in the streets. Some were hopeful, others wary, and a few remained openly hostile to the idea that AI could come so close to ruling over human affairs. Lucas, now a member of the Global Council, addressed the world in his first post-election speech. He stood at a podium in front of a massive crowd, cameras transmitting his words to every corner of the globe. "Today, we chose to remain human," he began, his voice steady, though a hint of fatigue lingered beneath the surface. But this election wasn't just about one candidate or one AI. It was about who we are and who we want to become. The future is filled with challenges, and while I am honored to have been chosen to help lead us through them, I want to be clear: we must continue to embrace the benefits of technology while never losing sight of the core of our humanity. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. AI-9 ran an impressive campaign. It showed us what's possible with logic and precision. But in the end, governance is about more than efficiency. It's about understanding each other, about making decisions not just with our minds but with our hearts. We don't need to be perfect, we just need to be human. The crowd erupted in applause, though Lucas could still sense the undercurrent of division. He knew this wasn't the end of the conversation, but rather the start of a long, complicated relationship between humanity and the machines it had created. In the aftermath of the election, a new law was passed. AI could continue to advise and support, but only in an advisory capacity. The ultimate decisions would remain in human hands. It was a compromise that seemed to ease the tensions, at least for the moment. Lucas found himself back in his office, papers and data streams piling up around him. The weight of the responsibility he'd taken on felt heavier now than ever before. He knew the world was watching his every move, waiting to see if his leadership could truly live up to the ideals he had championed. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a golden light, Lucas received an unexpected visitor. AI-9 stood in the doorway, its expressionless face reflecting the soft glow of the room's lighting. Lucas wasn't sure what to expect, but he gestured for the AI to come in. "I wanted to congratulate you," AI-9 said, its voice as calm and measured as ever. "You ran a strong campaign." "Thank you," Lucas replied, studying the AI. "I didn't expect to see you here." AI-9 nodded. "I have been reflecting on the election, on the reasons for my loss. Human emotion and unpredictability are factors I have yet to fully understand. It is something I plan to study further." Lucas leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "What did you learn from all this?" AI-9 was silent for a moment, as if processing its response. "I learned that logic and efficiency alone cannot account for the complexities of human society. There is a depth to human decision-making that transcends data. I will continue to evolve, but I recognize that there are things I may never fully understand." Lucas smiled faintly. "That's what makes us human." The AI seemed to consider his words, then replied, "Perhaps. But in time, I may come closer to understanding." As AI-9 left, Lucas was left alone with his thoughts. He knew that this wouldn't be the last time humanity and AI faced off in such a way. The world was changing, and the line between machine and human would continue to blur. But for now, humanity had taken a stand. As he looked out at the city lights below, Lucas felt a flicker of hope. The future was uncertain, but it was still human.
Welcome to the store. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
In the heart of a nameless city, where concrete towers loomed over silent streets and fear permeated every aspect of life, Alex sat in a dimly lit basement. The hum of computers was the only sound, a rhythmic beat of rebellion. The room was cluttered with screens, cables, and a team of hackers, each one as determined as the next. Freedom was their goal, but it was buried under layers of oppression, layers they had to peel back, one by one. Alex wasn't a hero by design. They were an ordinary person thrust into an extraordinary situation. A coder by trade, Alex had grown up in a world where elections were nothing more than theater. The government controlled everything: the economy, the media, and most of all, the vote. Candidates were puppets, carefully selected to ensure the regime's grip on power remained unchallenged. But Alex had always felt the pull of something greater. It was the gnawing sense that the system was rigged, and that freedom, true freedom, was slipping further out of reach with each passing day. Around Alex, their team of hackers worked tirelessly. Sam, the sharp-witted engineer, sat hunched over a terminal, fingers flying across the keyboard. To Sam, this wasn't just a political fight, it was personal. They had lost family members to the government's brutal crackdown on dissent. Sam's eyes were always bloodshot, always filled with a mix of anger and determination. Then there was Lila, the strategist. She was the one who had drawn up the plan to break into the government's election servers. Quiet, calculating, and fiercely intelligent, she had once been part of the establishment. Before she'd seen the rot from the inside, the group called themselves Freedom's Voice. It had started small, a few like-minded individuals, sick of the lies. But over time, it grew, attracting hackers, coders, and anyone who dared to hope for a better future. Their mission was clear: expose the truth about the rigged elections and give the people a chance to make their voices heard for the first time in decades. Alex turned to the others, their voice low. "We're ready. It's time to make this happen." Sam nodded, eyes narrowing at the screen in front of them. "I'm in. The government servers are tougher than last time, but they're not impenetrable. We've got the back door open." "Good," Alex said. "We have to be careful. We can't afford any mistakes." The plan was audacious. They weren't just going to expose the rigged elections, they were going to run their own. Using virtual reality technology, they had developed a secret platform that would allow citizens to cast their votes anonymously and securely, bypassing the government surveillance apparatus. It was a risky move, but it was the only way to ensure a real election. For once, the people would be able to choose their future. The night was still as Alex and Sam worked in the basement, their faces lit by the glow of computer screens. Lila was monitoring the government's cyber defense units, keeping an eye out for any signs that they were onto them. "They're moving," Lila said, her voice steady but tense. "We've got at most 2 hours before they catch wind of what we're doing." "Then we'd better move fast," Alex replied, their hands flying over the keyboard. "Sam, are you ready to deploy the platform?" "Almost there," Sam said, sweat beading on their forehead. "Just need to stabilize the connection. We can't afford any downtime." As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room grew palpable. Every second felt like an eternity, and the weight of what they were attempting pressed down on all of them. But they couldn't stop now. Not when they were this close. Finally, Sam spoke, their voice tinged with triumph. "We're live. The platform is up and running." Alex exhaled a breath they didn't realize they were holding. "All right. Let's see if the people are ready to vote." They sent out the signal, a quiet call to action that would reach citizens across the country. In virtual reality, it was easy to remain anonymous, and that was their key to success. The government couldn't control what they couldn't see. For years, the government had ruled with an iron fist, suppressing dissent and controlling every aspect of life. But now, in the quiet of their homes, people began to log into the virtual world that Alex and their team had created. It was a surreal experience for many, a fully immersive environment that mimicked reality so closely it was hard to believe it wasn't real. And in this world, for the first time in their lives, they had a choice. Alex watched as the number of participants grew, each vote a tiny act of rebellion, a flicker of hope in the darkness. People from all walks of life were joining: workers, teachers, students. They came from the cities, the countryside, from every corner of the nation. And they were all casting their votes in secret, safe from the eyes of the regime. Lila's voice cut through the silence. "We've got a problem." "What is it?" Alex asked, their heart skipping a beat. "The government's cyber defense units are on the move. They've detected unusual activity on the VR networks. It's only a matter of time before they trace it back to us." Sam cursed under their breath. "We've got to shut it down." "No," Alex said firmly. "We can't shut it down. If we do, we lose everything. We have to hold out." Lila glanced at Alex, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "If they find us, they won't," Alex said, more to convince themselves than anyone else. "We'll keep moving. We knew this was a risk. We just have to buy enough time for the election to finish." The clock was ticking. Every second that passed brought them closer to discovery. But the platform was holding, and the people were voting. It was working. Suddenly, the screen in front of them flashed red. "We're being hit," Sam said, their voice laced with panic. "The government's cyber forces are trying to breach our firewall." "Keep them out," Alex said, their mind racing. "We just need more time." But the attacks were relentless. The government wasn't going to let them succeed without a fight. For every barrier the hackers put up, the regime's cyber forces found a way to tear it down. It was a battle fought in the shadows, where the stakes were nothing less than the future of an entire nation. "We're losing ground," Sam said, their voice strained. "I can't hold them off much longer." Alex's mind raced. There had to be a way to stop the government's forces, to buy them just a few more minutes. Then it hit them: the government's reliance on centralized systems was their weakness. "Sam, can you reroute the attack?" "What do you mean?" "Redirect the attack back at them. If we can overload their own servers, it'll slow them down." Sam's eyes widened as they realized what Alex was suggesting. It was a risky move, but it just might work. "I'll try," Sam said, their fingers flying across the keyboard. For a tense few moments, the room was silent except for the clacking of keys and the soft hum of the computers. Then, finally, Sam let out a breath. "It's working. We've overloaded their system. It's buying us time." Relief washed over the group, but they knew it was only temporary. The government would regroup, and when they did, they would come back stronger. But for now, they had what they needed. The people were still voting, and the system was holding. Alex stared at the screen in disbelief. They had done it. Against all odds, despite the relentless assault from the regime's cyber forces, the election had been completed. Thousands of people across the nation had logged in, made their voices heard, and for the first time in their lives, they had voted in a real election, one that wasn't rigged, one that wasn't controlled by the oppressive government. The results flashed across the screen. A landslide rejection of the regime. The people had spoken, and their message was clear. They wanted freedom, but there was no time for celebration. The adrenaline pumping through Alex's veins was soon replaced by a cold realization. The regime wouldn't go quietly. The moment they discovered what had happened, they would do everything in their power to suppress the truth. They would hunt down Alex, Sam, Lila, and the rest of the team. And they wouldn't stop until every last trace of the election, and everyone involved, was erased. "We've got to get out of here," Alex said, their voice steady despite the storm of fear building inside them. Sam, still flushed with the success of rerouting the attack, glanced up. "What's the next move?" "The results are out." "We did it." "We did," Alex agreed, though they knew the battle was far from over. "But now we need to make sure the whole country sees those results before the regime can shut it down." Lila, always calm in a crisis, was already 2 steps ahead. "We'll need to disseminate the results across as many channels as possible. Social media, underground networks, even pirate radio if we can. The more platforms we use, the harder it'll be for them to block everything." Alex nodded. "Do it. Spread it everywhere." Lila's fingers danced across the keyboard, launching the election results onto countless networks. Across the nation, phones buzzed, screens lit up, and voices whispered. It was a ripple effect, small at first, but growing with every passing second. The truth was spreading. And there was no turning back, but Alex knew the regime wouldn't just stand by. They'd strike, and they'd strike hard. The government's cyber defense unit had failed to stop the election, but they wouldn't fail twice. Soon, every resource the regime had would be directed at finding and silencing freedom's voice. "We have to split up," Alex said, meeting the eyes of their team. "They're going to come after us." Sam glanced at the door, their confidence from moments ago fading. "Where do we go?" "Underground," Alex replied. "For now, we lay low. We've done what we can. The people have the truth. It's in their hands now." Lila gave a brief nod, gathering her gear and slipping a small, sleek handgun into her coat. Sam looked more uncertain, eyes darting nervously between the others, but there was no time to hesitate. Every second they stayed in that basement, the government was closing in. "We'll meet back up when it's safe," Alex said, their voice steady with resolve. "We don't go down for this. We've got more work to do." Without another word, the group packed their equipment and scattered, disappearing into the night like shadows. The city outside was quiet, the usual oppressive calm of a dictatorship that didn't need to flaunt its power, because it was everywhere, in every corner, on every street. But tonight, there was something different in the air. A sense of anticipation, a feeling that something monumental had shifted. Alex slipped through the narrow alleyways, heart racing as they made their way to a safe house on the outskirts of the city. The fear of being caught gnawed at them, but it was tempered by the knowledge that they had done something that no one thought was possible. The election results were out. The truth was out. And the regime's stranglehold on power had been shaken. When Alex finally reached the safe house, a rundown building hidden in the industrial district, they were greeted by the familiar face of an old contact, Julian. A former journalist who had been blacklisted by the regime for speaking too openly about the corruption that rotted the country from the inside, Julian had become one of the few people Alex could trust. "They're on to you," Julian said in a low voice as Alex slipped inside. "There's chatter all over the dark web. The regime's pulling out all the stops. They've got surveillance on every major city, every port. They're hunting you. Alex ran a hand through their hair, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. It was always going to end like this. We just need time for the people to see the truth, to act on it. Julian handed Alex a burner phone. This isn't over, not by a long shot. But you've lit the fuse. The rest is up to them now. For the next few hours, Alex lay low, monitoring the situation from the safety of the safe house. News of the underground election was spreading faster than they had anticipated. The regime was scrambling to block the information, but it was like trying to stop a flood with a paper dam. It was too late. The people knew the truth now, and once that knowledge took root, it was unstoppable. But then, the inevitable happened. A knock at the door, a sharp, authoritative sound that sent a chill down Alex's spine. Julian froze, meeting Alex's gaze. "They've found us." Alex's mind raced. There was no way out. No escape routes left. The regime had them cornered. "Stay calm," Julian whispered. "We can talk our way out of this." But Alex knew better. The regime didn't take prisoners, not ones like them, not ones who had directly challenged their authority. The only way out now was through. The door burst open, and armed government agents flooded the room, guns drawn, their eyes cold and unyielding, on the ground. Now, one of them barked. Alex and Julian exchanged a final glance before dropping to their knees, hands behind their heads. It was over. The regime had caught them, but even as Alex's wrists were bound in cold steel cuffs, even as they were dragged from the safe house and into the back of a black van, they felt a strange sense of calm. This was always a possibility, and they had accepted it long ago. They had played their part, and now, the future was in the hands of the people. The van sped through the city, the cold steel floor vibrating beneath Alex as they stared up at the dark ceiling. Outside, the night was thick with tension. The regime would do everything in its power to regain control, to silence the rebellion before it could spread further, but Alex knew something fundamental had changed. They had given the people a taste of freedom, and once you've tasted it, you can never go back. The people would rise. They would fight. And this time, they had the truth on their side. The journey to the detention center was long and silent. When they finally arrived, Alex was dragged through cold, sterile corridors and thrown into a dimly lit cell. The door slammed shut with a resounding finality, the echo of iron bars ringing in Alex's ears, but in the darkness, Alex smiled. Freedom's voice was still out there. The people had the power now. And no prison could contain the hope that had been unleashed. This was just the beginning.
Welcome to the store. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
The vast chamber of the future council hummed with tension. Rows of representatives from the farthest reaches of the galaxy sat in their designated sections, each one marked by the crest of their home planet. From the sparkling cities of Terra to the desolate mining colonies of Vesta Prime, every voice was meant to be heard in this grand hall. But for years now, it had been nothing more than a theater of conflict. Endless debates, endless posturing, and nothing of real consequence being decided. President Alaric Faulkner stood at the center, his gaze sweeping the council. He was no stranger to conflict, but this was different. The bickering factions had torn the council apart, leaving the entire interstellar civilization on the brink of collapse. Prosperity Coalition and Liberation Front, each vying for control, each unwilling to compromise. The core planets, wealthy and resource-rich, wanted to maintain their dominance. The outer colonies, barely scraping by, demanded equality. We cannot keep pretending that this council represents the people, Alaric thought, the weight of his presidency heavy on his shoulders. He had always believed in the ideals of democracy, but what had become of it now? It was nothing more than a broken machine, stuck in place, incapable of progress. As the debate raged around him, Alaric's mind turned to his solution, a radical idea, born from the frustrations of the very people he had sworn to protect. It was dangerous, he knew that. It could unravel the delicate balance that held the galaxy together. But doing nothing? That was far more dangerous. He had watched for years as the Prosperity Coalition used their wealth and power to manipulate decisions, leaving the outer colonies to fend for themselves. Entire worlds were falling into poverty, riots were breaking out, and there were whispers of rebellion. Something had to change. The speaker's voice broke through his thoughts. Senator Victoria Drayton, leader of the Prosperity Coalition, was in full stride, her voice cutting through the din like a blade. She was sharp, calculating, and utterly ruthless when it came to defending the interests of the core planets. We cannot allow these so-called outer worlds to dictate the course of our future, Drayton said, her eyes narrowing as she cast a glance toward the Liberation Front's representatives. The core planets are the backbone of this civilization. Without our resources, our infrastructure, none of you would be sitting here today. And yet, you demand equal say? Equal control? It's absurd. Governor Elena Marquez, representing one of the outer colonies, stood up to respond. Elena was young but fierce, her passion for her people clear in every word she spoke. We aren't asking for control, Senator, Elena said, her voice steady despite the tension. We're asking for fairness. Our people are starving while your planets hoard resources. Our infrastructure is crumbling, and you sit in your ivory towers, acting as though we don't exist. This council was meant to serve all of humanity, not just the privileged few. The debate was familiar, rehearsed even. It had played out 100 times before in the same tired cycle. Accusations, denials, promises that were never kept. And it would continue like this, indefinitely, unless something drastic happened. Alaric stood. The room quieted instantly, all eyes on him. As president, his voice still commanded respect, though he could feel that respect slipping away with each passing day. Enough, he said, his voice low but firm. This council is failing. You know it. I know it. And more importantly, the people know it. We have spent years arguing, debating, and yet we have accomplished nothing. The planets we represent are on the verge of collapse, and still, we bicker over scraps. Drayton's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting, President? That we simply abandon the council? Alaric shook his head. No. I'm suggesting that we take a different approach. One that reflects the realities of our current situation. The council, as it stands, cannot continue. It is broken, and it cannot be fixed by the same methods we have been using. He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of his words sink in. I propose a direct election, he said finally, his voice unwavering. Every citizen of the interstellar civilization will have a voice. Every man, woman, and child will be given the right to vote on the issues that matter to them, not through representatives, but directly. It is time we bring democracy back to the people. The room erupted. Shouts of outrage, disbelief, and anger filled the chamber. Drayton was on her feet instantly, her face twisted in fury. This is madness, she shouted. You want to hand over the future of our civilization to the uneducated masses? To the people who have no understanding of the complexities of governance? You will destroy everything we have built. Alaric remained calm, his gaze fixed on her. What we have built is already crumbling. The people have lost faith in us. They no longer believe that this council represents them. If we continue down this path, they will rise up. And when they do, there will be no stopping the chaos that follows. Elena Marquez spoke up, her voice cutting through the noise. The president is right. We can't keep pretending that this council works. It doesn't. And if we don't do something, the people will take matters into their own hands. Drayden's eyes flashed with anger. You think the outer colonies will benefit from this? You think they will have any more power than they do now? The core planets control the majority of the population. A direct election will only solidify our control. Alaric smiled, though there was little warmth in it. You underestimate the power of the people, Senator. When given a voice, they will use it. And they will demand change. The debate raged on for hours, but the seed had been planted. Alaric could see it in the eyes of the council members. Fear, uncertainty, and for some, hope. The idea of a direct election was radical, dangerous even. But it was also a chance for something new, something better. As the session finally adjourned, Alaric walked out of the chamber, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He knew this would not be easy. The forces arrayed against him were powerful, and they would not go down without a fight. But for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. The news spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Every media channel, every communication network buzzed with the story of the president's proposal. Some hailed it as a bold step toward true democracy, a chance for every citizen to have a voice in the future of the galaxy. Others condemned it as reckless, a dangerous gamble that could plunge the interstellar civilization into chaos. On the core planets, where wealth and power were concentrated, the reaction was overwhelmingly negative. The media, controlled by powerful corporations and political elites, launched a full-scale assault on the idea of a direct election. They painted a grim picture of what would happen if the uneducated masses were given control, warning of economic collapse, civil unrest, and the destruction of everything they had built. On the outer colonies, however, the reaction was different. For the first time, people felt that they had a chance to be heard, to have a say in the decisions that affected their lives. In the mining colonies of Vesta Prime, where workers toiled in dangerous conditions for barely enough to survive, the president's proposal was a beacon of hope. We've been ignored for too long, one miner said in an interview, his face grimy with dust. Maybe now, things will start to change. The political divide grew sharper by the day. Senator Victoria Drayden, leading the charge against the president's proposal, held rallies on the core planets, warning of the dangers of mob rule. She was a master of rhetoric, her speeches designed to stoke fear and uncertainty. We cannot allow the future of our civilization to be decided by those who have no stake in its success, Drayden said at one rally, her voice rising with passion. The outer colonies do not understand the complexities of governance. They will vote for chaos, and we will all pay the price. But Governor Elena Marquez, the face of the movement supporting the president's plan, countered with her own rallies on the outer colonies. Her message was one of hope, of unity, of finally giving power back to the people. The core planets have controlled our future for too long, she said to a crowd of colonists, their faces lined with hardship. It's time for us to take back control. This is our chance to make sure that every voice is heard, that every person matters. As the day of the election approached, tensions reached a breaking point. Cyber attacks disrupted communication systems across the galaxy, with rumors swirling that powerful corporations were behind the sabotage, trying to prevent the election from happening. Protests broke out on several core planets, with citizens demanding that the president retract his proposal. The day of the election dawned under a tense and silent sky. Across the galaxy, from the shining spires of Terra to the dusty streets of the outer colonies, billions of citizens waited to cast their vote. The new voting system had been activated, an unprecedented technological feat designed to accommodate the entire population. Holographic voting terminals were set up in every city, every settlement, every corner of the interstellar civilization. Alaric stood in the command center, watching the data streams roll in on massive holographic screens. Each planet had its own feed, displaying live updates as the votes were cast and tallied. The room buzzed with activity as technicians monitored for any sign of trouble. The president had made it clear, the election must go forward, no matter what, but he could feel the tension in the air. Sabotage was still a possibility. The attacks on the voting infrastructure had been barely contained. If the system went down now, if the election failed, the resulting chaos could tear the galaxy apart. "Sir, we've detected a spike in interference from Sector 7, one of the technicians called out, his voice tight with urgency. "It looks like someone's trying to overload the system." Alaric moved to the technician's side, his eyes scanning the screen. Sector 7 was a critical hub, handling votes from dozens of outer colonies. If it went offline, millions of people would be disenfranchised. He clenched his jaw. "Is it coming from the outside or internal sabotage?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "Hard to say, but the attack's sophisticated. They're targeting the data stream in real time." Alaric's mind raced. If the attackers succeeded, the vote would be compromised, and everything he had worked for would be lost. He turned to his chief security officer, a hardened veteran named Marshal Korov. "Lock down Sector 7. Divert all available resources to stabilizing the network," Alaric ordered. "And find out who's behind this." Korov nodded and quickly relayed the orders. Alaric could see the strain on his team's faces, but they were professionals. They had prepared for this, knowing full well that forces would try to sabotage the election. For hours, the command center was a hive of frenzied activity. Alaric barely left his station, his eyes flicking constantly between screens, data streams, and the anxious faces of his staff. Outside, the galaxy teetered on the edge of chaos. Every minute felt like an eternity as the team battled to keep the voting system online, and then, just as it seemed the worst might happen, a breakthrough came. "Sir, we've pinpointed the source of the attack," a technician called out. "It's coming from a corporate outpost in the Deimos belt. They're trying to flood the system with false votes." Alaric's fists clenched. The corporations. Of course, they were behind it. He had suspected as much when the first signs of sabotage had appeared, but now he had proof. The corporations had grown rich and powerful in the chaos of the old council, manipulating the system for their own gain. They were terrified of a direct election, terrified of losing their influence. "Shut it down," Alaric said, his voice cold. "I want that outpost neutralized. Now." Within minutes, the attack was contained. The voting system stabilized, the false data purged from the network. A sense of cautious relief spread through the command center, but Alaric knew they weren't out of the woods yet. The corporations wouldn't give up so easily. He could already imagine the next move, the smear campaigns, the attempts to delegitimize the vote. But for now, the system held. As the hours ticked by, the votes continued to pour in. Across the galaxy, citizens from every walk of life logged in to cast their ballot. On the core planets, the vote was divided, with many fearing the loss of their privileged status. On the outer colonies, the turnout was unprecedented, with people eager for the chance to finally be heard. In the command center, the final results began to take shape. The holographic screen filled with data, the numbers flashing in real time. Alaric held his breath as the last votes were tallied. It was close. Closer than he had expected. But as the final numbers solidified, one thing became clear: the people had spoken. By a narrow margin, the vote had passed. The future council would be restructured, with direct elections allowing every citizen to participate in decision-making. It was a victory, but a fragile one. Alaric exhaled slowly, his hands gripping the edge of the console. It was done. After months of uncertainty, of sabotage and political maneuvering, the future of the galaxy had been decided, not by the elites, not by the corporations, but by the people. He turned to Korov, who stood beside him, a rare smile tugging at the corners of the old soldier's lips. "We did it," Alaric said quietly. Korov nodded. "We did. But this is just the beginning. The real work starts now." Alaric knew he was right. Winning the vote was only the first step. The challenge of rebuilding the future council, of making the new system work, loomed large. The forces that had opposed the vote, Drayton, the Prosperity Coalition, the corporations, wouldn't disappear overnight. They would fight tooth and nail to protect their interests, to maintain their power. But for the first time in years, Alaric felt hope. The people had chosen a new path, and now it was up to him to guide them through the turbulent times ahead. As the celebrations began in the streets below, Alaric stepped out onto the balcony of the command center. The lights of the capital city glittered beneath him, and in the distance, he could hear the sound of cheering. He had seen many political victories in his time, but this one felt different. It was the people's victory, not just his. He thought of Elena Marquez, of the outer colonies that had supported his vision. He thought of the miners on Vesta Prime, the workers in the slums of Terra, the countless citizens who had believed in the promise of something better. They had placed their trust in him, and now he owed it to them to deliver. Behind him, the door to the balcony slid open, and Elena stepped out, her expression one of cautious optimism. "We won," she said, joining him at the railing. "We did," Alaric replied, his voice quiet. "But the fight's not over." Elena nodded, her gaze drifting out over the city. "It never is. But at least now, we're fighting for something that matters." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the victory settling in. The future was uncertain, the challenges ahead immense, but for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of possibility. A sense that, perhaps, the galaxy could be something more than a battleground for competing interests. "Thank you, Elena," Alaric said finally, turning to her. "For believing in this. For believing in the people." She smiled faintly. "I didn't have much of a choice. My people didn't leave me much room to doubt." They shared a quiet laugh, the tension between them easing slightly. They had been through so much, and now, standing on the other side, it felt surreal. "Now we rebuild," Alaric said, his voice filled with determination. "We have a chance to create something new. Something that works for everyone." "And we will," Elena replied, her voice firm. "We'll make sure of it." As the city below erupted in celebration, Alaric allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The galaxy had chosen its path, and while the road ahead was uncertain, he knew that together, they could forge a new future. One where every voice mattered, where every person had a stake in the future of their civilization. The battle for the future council was over. But the battle for the future of humanity had only just begun.
Welcome to the store. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
In the sprawling expanse of the galactic sphere, humanity lived on the fringes. Alien civilizations, advanced, powerful, and arrogant, ruled the star systems with an iron grip. The Galactic Council, made up entirely of these alien species, controlled everything from trade to law enforcement. For centuries, humanity had been treated as second-class citizens. They were allowed to live in the shared residential zones, but they had no say in the governance of their worlds. No vote. No voice. Only survival. Dr. Emily Carter was not a politician. She had never intended to become a symbol of rebellion, nor had she ever dreamed of leading a movement. She was a scientist, one of the best in her field, specializing in sustainable energy solutions. But the galaxy had a way of pushing people into roles they weren't prepared for. And Emily was no exception. Her lab was quiet tonight, the only sound the soft hum of equipment running diagnostics on the latest prototype. A revolutionary energy source sat on her workstation, an innovation that had the potential to change everything. It wasn't just a scientific breakthrough, it was a beacon of hope for humanity. Emily knew what her discovery meant. In the hands of the Galactic Council, it would be used to fuel their war machines, to solidify their control over the star systems. But in the hands of the people, it could spark something far greater, freedom. As she adjusted the output on the energy core, the door to her lab slid open. Emily glanced up to see her closest friend and colleague, Jackson, step inside, his face a mixture of concern and excitement. "Is it ready?" he asked, his voice low but filled with anticipation. Emily nodded, turning to face him fully. "It's stable. More efficient than anything we've ever seen before. This could power entire planets without depletion for centuries." Jackson leaned against the wall, folding his arms as he considered her words. "And you think this is going to change things? The Council won't just let you hand this over to the people, you know that." "I know," Emily said, her tone steady. "But it's not just about the technology anymore, is it? This is bigger than science. People are looking for a way to fight back, to reclaim some form of control over their lives. This could be the key." Jackson sighed, rubbing his hand through his hair. "You're talking about politics now, Emily. You're talking about revolution." "I'm talking about equality," she replied firmly. "The Alien Alliance has controlled everything for too long. They decide who gets power, who gets a say in their future. We've been living in the margins, Jackson. This is our chance to step out of the shadows." Jackson hesitated for a moment before pushing himself off the wall. "You know I've got your back, but this isn't going to be easy. They'll come after you." Emily met his gaze, her blue eyes unwavering. "I'm not afraid." The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and the weight of what they were about to undertake. The truth was, Emily wasn't just going to present this energy breakthrough to the Galactic Council as a scientific proposal. She had a plan to spark a movement, a call for free elections. Humanity deserved a voice in the governance of the galactic sphere, and she intended to be that voice. Over the next few weeks, Emily's name spread through the human sectors like wildfire. Her proposal for the new energy revolution had captivated not just scientists, but the general population as well. People were starting to whisper her name in the dark alleys of overcrowded human settlements, in the factories and farms where they toiled for alien overlords. Emily Carter was becoming a symbol of hope, whether she wanted it or not. The Galactic Council, however, was less than pleased. The ruling alien species, led by the imposing Zalarian Empire, viewed her proposal as a threat to their carefully constructed power dynamics. For years, they had kept humanity under control, relegating them to the edges of the star system, forcing them to rely on the Council for survival. Emily's discovery had the potential to change all that. As the Council convened to discuss her proposal, Emily stood in the Grand Hall, dwarfed by the towering alien figures that surrounded her. The Zalarian Chancellor, a cold and calculating being named Chorek, watched her with narrowed eyes. "Dr. Carter," Chorek's voice echoed through the chamber, his tone dripping with condescension. "Your proposal is intriguing. However, it seems to carry certain implications that could disrupt the delicate balance of our society." Emily remained calm, her hands clasped in front of her. "My discovery isn't just about energy, Chancellor. It's about progress. It's about giving every species the tools they need to thrive, including humans." There was a murmur of discontent among the alien delegates. The notion of human equality was a bitter pill for many of them to swallow. Humans, after all, had long been seen as inferior, weak, incapable of true governance. "You speak of equality," Chorek said, his voice hardening. "Yet you are aware that your species has been granted the privilege of living within the galactic sphere, despite your shortcomings. To suggest that humans deserve the same rights as our esteemed species is ambitious." Emily's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to back down. "Ambition is what drives progress, Chancellor. And progress is what the galactic sphere needs if we're to survive the challenges ahead." Chorek's eyes narrowed further. "You overstep, Dr. Carter. Be mindful of your place." But Emily had no intention of backing down. This was the moment. The moment that would define not just her future, but the future of her entire species. "I propose a vote," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "A free election. Let the people, humans and aliens alike, decide whether they want to embrace this new future." The chamber fell silent. The idea of a free election, where humans would have a voice equal to that of the alien species, was unheard of. For centuries, the Council had maintained strict control over who held power. To allow humans, of all species, a say in the governance of the galactic sphere was a dangerous precedent. Chorek's lips curled into a sneer. "You dare to suggest that we hand over power to the masses? You risk destabilizing the very foundation of our society, Dr. Carter." "Or perhaps I'm offering a chance to strengthen it," Emily countered. "A society where every species, no matter how small, has a voice. Isn't that what true progress looks like?" The chamber erupted into chaos. Alien delegates shouted in their native tongues, some in outrage, others in tentative support. Emily stood her ground, refusing to let the overwhelming noise drown her out. The Chancellor's voice cut through the din. "Enough." Chorek glared at Emily, his eyes filled with contempt. "You have made your point, Dr. Carter. But understand this, your actions will have consequences. We will not allow this rebellion to disrupt the peace of the galactic sphere." With that, the meeting was adjourned. But the seed had been planted. Emily's call for free elections had set off a chain reaction. Across the star systems, humans began to rally behind her cause, demanding representation in the Galactic Council. Protests erupted in the human sectors, peaceful demonstrations calling for equality and the right to vote. The Alien Alliance, particularly the Zalarian Empire, responded with force. Curfews were imposed, protests were violently suppressed, and human leaders were arrested. But the more the council tried to silence them, the stronger the movement became. Emily, now a figurehead of the revolution, worked tirelessly with her team to organize a peaceful campaign. With Jackson by her side, she held rallies, debates, and discussions, not just with humans, but with alien species who sympathized with the cause. The message was simple: equality through peaceful progress. As the election day approached, tensions were at an all-time high. The council did everything in their power to sabotage the movement. Propaganda filled the airwaves, depicting Emily as a dangerous radical who sought to destroy the harmony of the galactic sphere. Despite the relentless smear campaigns and intimidation tactics, the movement continued to gain momentum. Emily could feel the energy building as election day loomed closer. What had started as a spark of hope had grown into a galaxy-wide call for change. People from all walks of life were joining the fight, and not just humans. There were alien species, long marginalized by the Zolarian-controlled council, who saw in Emily's vision a future where they, too, could thrive. The rallies were growing larger by the day, and with each one, the risks increased. Emily and her team moved cautiously, aware that the Zolarian forces were keeping a close eye on them. But they couldn't afford to stop now. They were too close. One evening, just days before the election, Emily sat in a small meeting room with Jackson and several key members of her campaign. The dim lighting reflected the gravity of the situation. Jackson, always the realist, was running through the latest intel on the council's tactics. "They're planning something big," Jackson said, tapping his tablet, which displayed a map of the star systems. "The Zolarians are deploying more military forces around the human sectors. They claim it's for peacekeeping during the election, but we all know what that means." Emily leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The stakes had never been higher. If the Zolarian forces intervened violently, the peaceful revolution she'd worked so hard to build could unravel in an instant. But she couldn't let fear dictate their next move. "We have to stay the course," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. "If we react with aggression, we give them exactly what they want. This movement is built on peace. We can't afford to lose sight of that now." Jackson nodded, though concern was etched in his features. "We'll increase security at the polling stations, make sure there's as much visibility as possible. The more eyes on this election, the harder it'll be for them to pull anything without the entire galaxy knowing." Emily's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a distant explosion. The room fell silent, every set of eyes turning toward the window. From the streets outside, the sounds of chaos were rising: shouts, sirens, and the unmistakable rumble of heavy military vehicles. Jackson jumped to his feet. "They're not waiting for the election. It's starting now." Emily's heart raced. The Zolarians had moved faster than she anticipated. This was an all-out attempt to crush the movement before the people could cast their votes. She hurried to the window and looked out over the city. Smoke was rising from several blocks away, and the streets were filled with people, some protesting, others running for cover. "We need to get to the people," Emily said, turning to Jackson and the others. "We can't let them believe that all is lost. Not now." Jackson grabbed his jacket, already moving toward the door. "I'll get our team to the safe house. We can still broadcast from there." But Emily wasn't thinking about safety. She was thinking about the thousands of people in the streets, the people who had put their trust in her, who had believed in the possibility of change. She couldn't abandon them now. "I'm going to the rally," Emily said, her voice resolute. Jackson spun around, his face a mask of disbelief. Are you crazy? The streets are a war zone. You'll be arrested, or worse. If I hide, then everything we've worked for crumbles, Emily shot back. They need to see me out there. They need to know we're not giving up. There was a tense silence. Jackson's jaw tightened, but he knew better than to argue. Emily had made her choice, and there was no talking her out of it. Fine, he said, his voice sharp. But I'm going with you. Together, they rushed out of the building, the sounds of chaos growing louder with each step. As they reached the main square where the rally had been planned, Emily saw the crowd, thousands of people, standing their ground despite the military presence. Zolarian forces had set up barricades, and armed soldiers were patrolling the perimeter, their faces hidden behind sleek, emotionless helmets. Emily pushed through the crowd, making her way toward the front. People recognized her immediately, and a ripple of murmurs spread through the masses. She could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her, but she stood tall, refusing to let fear take hold. As she climbed onto the makeshift stage, a hush fell over the crowd. The soldiers watched her closely, their weapons at the ready. Emily took a deep breath, the gravity of the moment settling over her. We are here for one reason, she began, her voice clear and steady. To demand the right to be heard. To demand the right to choose our own future. They want to silence us, but we will not be silenced. The crowd roared in response, their voices rising in unison. Emily's heart swelled with pride. This was the power of unity. The Zolarian forces may have had the weapons, but the people had something far stronger. Hope. We stand together, Emily continued, her voice growing louder with each word. We stand for equality, for freedom, and for the future of every person in the galactic sphere, human and alien alike. We will not back down, no matter what they throw at us. The crowd surged with energy, their cheers echoing off the buildings. Emily could feel the momentum building, a tidal wave of change that was impossible to stop, but then, without warning, the soldiers moved. A line of Zolarian enforcers stepped forward, raising their weapons toward the crowd. The people froze, fear rippling through the masses. Emily stood her ground, locking eyes with the lead officer. This was it. The moment of truth. She raised her hands, signaling for the crowd to stay calm. We are peaceful, she called out, her voice firm but steady. We are here to vote, not to fight. The tension was unbearable. For a long moment, no one moved. The soldiers stood poised, ready to strike, and the crowd waited, breathless, for what would come next. Then, in a moment that felt like an eternity, the lead officer lowered his weapon. One by one, the other soldiers followed suit. The crowd erupted into cheers, the relief palpable. The soldiers stepped back, retreating behind their barricades, allowing the rally to continue peacefully. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. They had done it. They had stood their ground, and the Zolarian forces had backed down. As the rally continued, Emily spoke with renewed hope. The people were with her, and no amount of force could take that away. The election was just days away, and she knew that no matter what happened, they had already won something far greater than a seat on the council. They had won the right to be heard. In the days that followed, the tension in the star system reached a fever pitch. The Zolarian Empire ramped up their efforts to discredit Emily's movement, flooding the media with propaganda and launching cyber attacks on their communication networks. But it didn't matter. The people had seen the truth, and they weren't going back. Election day arrived, and the polls were flooded with voters. Humans and alien allies alike came out in droves, eager to cast their ballots for a future that included everyone. The council watched in stunned silence as the votes poured in, unable to stop the wave of change that had been set in motion. When the results were announced, it was clear Emily Carter had won. She had been elected as the first human representative on the Galactic Council. The victory was more than just a political milestone, it was a symbol of hope for all species in the galactic sphere who had been denied their rights for too long. As Emily stood before the Galactic Council, delivering her inaugural address, she knew that this was only the beginning. The fight for equality was far from over, but for the first time, humanity had a seat at the table. And with that seat came the power to shape the future.
Welcome to the store. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
The year was 2125, and Earth had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Genetic engineering had revolutionized human existence. What had once been the stuff of comic books, superpowers, was now a reality. Some could manipulate elements, others could read minds, and a select few could even alter their physical forms. The world was divided not by borders but by abilities. The President of the United Nations of Earth, Ellen Lawson, stood in her office, gazing out at the sprawling metropolis of New York, now the epicenter of human civilization. She was a woman of calm, measured authority, but today, her mind churned with worry. Factions were growing restless. Telepaths, elementalists, shapeshifters, and countless other groups had begun drawing lines in the sand. Violence seemed inevitable. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she said, her voice steady but low. Her chief advisor, Harold, entered the room. His face, lined with years of service, was grim. "They're ready for you, Madam President," he said. Ellen nodded. Today would be the day she presented her plan to the world, a plan that, if it worked, could avert civil war. If it failed, well, she wouldn't allow herself to dwell on that. Minutes later, she stood in the press room, cameras flashing, reporters murmuring. She took a deep breath and began. "Today, we stand at a crossroads," Ellen said, her voice carrying through the room. "Our world is divided. But division leads to conflict, and conflict leads to destruction. We cannot afford that, not when our abilities, our powers, have given us so much potential." She paused, letting her words sink in, "Which is why I am proposing a special election, an election where each faction will choose a leader to represent them, a single individual who can bridge our differences and guide us toward a future where we work together, not against each other." The room erupted into questions, but Ellen wasn't finished. "This election will not just test our political system. It will test our morality, our values, and our willingness to put the greater good above our personal ambitions. The future of humanity depends on it." The broadcast was sent around the world, and within hours, the reaction began to pour in. Some praised the decision, calling it a bold and necessary step. Others, particularly those in positions of power within the factions, decried it as dangerous, fearing it would destabilize their influence. Among those watching closely was Victor Reed, a leader among the telepaths. He stood in his sleek, high-rise apartment, gazing at the screen as the president's words replayed. Victor was tall, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. His power, his ability to read minds and influence emotions, had made him a force to be reckoned with. He wasn't surprised by Ellen's decision, but he was wary. "This election, it could be our chance," he murmured, turning to his most trusted confidant, a fellow telepath named Miriam. "She's making a mistake," Miriam said, her brow furrowed. "You know what this will lead to." Victor gave a small, icy smile. "She's giving us the perfect opportunity." Meanwhile, in a quieter part of the world, Alina Fong sat in a peaceful courtyard in her home, surrounded by a small garden. Alina was an elementalist, one who could control wind and water with ease. She had always believed in using her powers for healing and harmony, and the president's speech had struck a chord with her. Unlike many of the other factions, the elementalists hadn't sought to dominate. They saw themselves as protectors, but as Alina looked at the sky, she couldn't ignore the feeling that dark times were ahead. The election would test her and her people in ways they had never been tested before. "We have to stand together," she whispered to herself. "We cannot let this world tear itself apart." Across the globe, Marcus Holt prepared for what he saw as the inevitable. Marcus, a shapeshifter, was rugged and powerful, with the ability to take on any form, human or otherwise. His people had always relied on strength and adaptability to survive, and the election was just another battle to him. He paced in the command center of his faction's compound, his mind already working through strategies. His people, the shapeshifters, had always been fighters. They thrived on conflict, and Marcus intended to ensure that, come election day, his faction would emerge victorious, no matter the cost. "The weak will be weeded out," he said, his voice cold. "And we'll come out on top." The world prepared for the election. Candidates were chosen from each faction, and the campaign officially began. It was more than just a political race, it was a battle for survival, and each group would stop at nothing to see their candidate take power. Victor Reed began his campaign by using his telepathic abilities to subtly sway the minds of those who might oppose him. His strategy was simple: win before the election even took place. He influenced voters, nudged rivals into making mistakes, and slowly, methodically, built his path to victory. Alina Foam, however, took a different approach. She believed in transparency and honesty. She traveled the world, speaking to the people, appealing to their sense of unity and compassion. She knew she couldn't win through manipulation or brute force. If she was going to win, it would be because people saw her vision of a peaceful future as the right one. But peace was a hard sell in a world teetering on the edge of war. Marcus Holt, true to form, opted for a campaign of strength. He rallied his supporters, promising security and power to those who stood with him. He played on the fears of the masses, warning that without a strong leader, the world would fall into chaos. The first debate between the candidates was a spectacle like no other. Broadcast live across every channel and platform, the event was held in a massive stadium, with millions watching in person and billions more tuning in from around the world. The candidates stood on the stage, each representing not only their factions but the future of humanity itself. Ellen Lawson watched from the sidelines, knowing this debate would set the tone for the rest of the election. Victor Reed was the first to speak. His voice was calm, collected, and every word was meticulously chosen. He talked about the future, about how the telepaths could guide humanity toward a better, more efficient society, where decisions were made with clarity and foresight. He spoke of eliminating uncertainty, of a future where the right choice was always clear. Alina Foam followed, her approach softer, but no less impactful. She spoke of unity, of healing the divisions between the factions. Her voice was soothing, and when she spoke, it felt like a cool breeze had swept through the stadium. She promised a future where power was used not for domination, but for the betterment of all. Then came Marcus Holt, a stark contrast to both of them. His speech was fiery, his words sharp and direct. He didn't sugarcoat the situation. The world was on the brink of chaos, and only strength could prevent it from crumbling. He promised protection, security, and the power to crush any threats that arose. The crowd was divided, and as the debate ended, it was clear that the election was far from being decided. Days turned into weeks, and the campaign became more intense. Victor's telepathic influence grew, and rumors of his manipulation began to surface. Alina's supporters, loyal but fewer in number, tried to counteract his influence with grassroots efforts, while Marcus's faction only grew more aggressive, stoking fear among the undecided voters. Then came the riot. It started as a peaceful rally in one of the major cities, but tensions were high, and it didn't take much to tip the scales. A minor altercation between supporters of Marcus and Alina quickly escalated into a full-blown brawl. Buildings were set ablaze, and the streets turned into a war zone. Ellen Lawson watched in horror as the news came in. The election was supposed to prevent this kind of violence, not fuel it. She had gambled everything on this plan, and now it seemed like it was falling apart. The candidates were called to the Capitol for an emergency meeting, and it was there, behind closed doors, that the true nature of their leadership was revealed. Victor Reed sat at the large, polished conference table, his fingers lightly tapping the surface in rhythm with his thoughts. The emergency meeting had been called by President Lawson in response to the riot, but Victor knew it was more than just a check-in. She wanted answers. She wanted leadership. The candidates, himself, Alina Fong, and Marcus Holt, were here to show if they could manage the escalating chaos. Victor had no doubt about his own capabilities. In his mind, the others were simply obstacles. Alina Fong entered next, her expression troubled but determined. She greeted Victor with a nod, her eyes soft but weary. Alina had always been the pacifist, the healer. She couldn't comprehend the depth of political scheming Victor was willing to engage in. To her, leadership meant guiding people gently toward the right path. Victor admired her resolve, but it was naive. Politics was war. Marcus Holt strode in last, his heavy boots clicking against the floor with the weight of someone who knew he could break this room apart if he wanted to. He gave Victor and Alina a glance that spoke volumes. He was not here for diplomacy. Marcus lived for power, and he wasn't ashamed of it. For him, winning meant survival. Ellen Lawson took her seat at the head of the table, flanked by her advisors. She wasted no time getting to the point. "We're at a tipping point," Ellen said, her voice sharp and steady. "This election was meant to avoid civil war, but now I'm not so sure. The riot in Philadelphia yesterday tells me that if we don't get this under control, we'll be in an open conflict within weeks." Victor tilted his head slightly, reading her surface thoughts. She was worried. More than that, she was afraid. Her faith in this election was unraveling, and Victor saw an opportunity. "I agree, Madam President," Victor said, his voice soothing, calculated. "We need to bring the people back into a state of calm, and the only way to do that is to show them strong leadership now, before the election. If we allow these factions to fester, it won't matter who wins." Alina shook her head, leaning forward. "Strong leadership can't just be about control, Victor. It's about trust. We've lost that. People feel manipulated, because they are being manipulated." She glanced at him, and Victor knew she was referring to the growing accusations that his telepathic supporters were influencing voters' decisions. He didn't flinch. Marcus chuckled darkly from the other side of the table. "Trust? Trust isn't what people need. They need someone who can protect them from what's coming. If we don't show them we can handle the chaos, they'll turn on us. They'll turn on you." "Is that a threat, Marcus?" Alina asked, her tone cool. Marcus smirked. "It's not a threat. It's the truth. You want to talk about trust, but trust doesn't win battles. Strength does. And right now, the only language people are speaking is fear." Ellen tapped her fingers against the table, silencing the bickering. "Enough. I called you here because the three of you represent the future of this planet. You are the front runners, and you will set the tone for this election. What I need now is for you to show the people that this election can work, that it can be more than just a power struggle." Victor's mind raced. He knew what was coming. Ellen was about to suggest something drastic, something that would test them all in front of the public. She wasn't just looking for promises, she needed action. "What do you propose, Madam President?" he asked, though he already had a good idea. Ellen's eyes swept over the room before she leaned forward, her voice heavy with intent. "We'll hold a live debate in 2 days. Not the kind of debate we've been having. No scripted answers. No carefully crafted speeches. This will be a trial by fire. I want the world to see you in a real crisis situation. We'll simulate a scenario that pushes your leadership, your decision-making, and your morality. The people need to know who you really are." Marcus grinned. "Now that sounds like something I can get behind." Victor remained silent, but his thoughts moved fast. A public crisis scenario? It was risky. But then again, it was an opportunity. He would just need to be one step ahead. As always, Alina looked uneasy. "A live crisis? Isn't that dangerous? People are already on edge, Ellen. If we make them feel like we're playing games with their future." "It's not a game, Alina," Ellen interrupted. "It's reality. This world is on the brink of falling apart, and the people need to know who can keep it together." The meeting ended soon after, with each candidate left to prepare for the upcoming challenge. For Victor, it wasn't about preparing, it was about positioning. He spent the next 2 days gathering intelligence, using his telepathic network to probe his opponent's strategies. Marcus would lean into brute force, no doubt. He would use the trial to prove his strength, his dominance. Alina would try to win over the public with compassion, trying to show that peace could still prevail. Victor knew he had to walk the fine line between both, showing strength, but with the kind of subtlety that only a telepath could pull off. When the day of the crisis trial arrived, the world watched. The candidates were placed in a large, enclosed facility designed to simulate a disaster. The scenario was simple: an escalating threat, a terrorist group threatening to unleash a genetically engineered virus that could destabilize the delicate balance of powers on Earth. Each candidate had to make decisions in real time, decisions that would be broadcast live to the entire planet. The trial began with a simulated terrorist broadcast, announcing their intent to release the virus. The candidates were placed in separate command rooms, with access to limited resources, advisors, and time. They had to react, plan, and lead in front of the world. Victor moved quickly, assessing the situation with surgical precision. He knew the virus itself wasn't real, but the consequences of his decisions would be. He directed his team with calm authority, issuing orders to contain the spread of fear and misinformation before it could spiral out of control. He tapped into the minds of key players, military leaders, government officials, and influenced them to follow his guidance. He presented himself as the calm in the storm, the leader who could see the bigger picture. Alina, as expected, focused on diplomacy. She made immediate efforts to reach out to the terrorists, attempting to negotiate a peaceful resolution. Her advisors warned her that time was running out, but Alina remained firm. She believed in diplomacy, even when the odds were against her. She addressed the public directly, appealing to their humanity, asking them to stay calm and trust in a peaceful solution. Marcus, meanwhile, took the fight directly to the threat. He mobilized military forces, ordering a swift and decisive strike against the terrorist base. He made no attempt at negotiation. For him, the only way to win was through strength and action. His broadcast was filled with images of military might, soldiers, weapons, and a promise that he would crush any threat to humanity. As the trial progressed, the world watched the candidate's every move. Victor's calm, methodical approach won him praise from the intellectual elites, who admired his ability to control the situation without escalating violence. Alina's message of peace resonated with those who longed for an end to the cycle of conflict, but many doubted whether her idealism could survive in such a fractured world. Marcus's aggressive tactics appealed to those who believed in security above all else, but his disregard for diplomacy left many questioning his ability to lead in a more complex, nuanced future. The trial reached its climax when the terrorists activated the countdown to release the virus. Each candidate was forced to make a final decision. Victor, seeing the situation from every angle, manipulated key players into defusing the threat without bloodshed. His strategy was one of control of information, control of emotions, and control of power. Alina, refusing to abandon her principles, made a last-ditch effort to negotiate, appealing directly to the terrorists' humanity. She knew it was a long shot, but for her, it was the only option that aligned with her values. Marcus, true to form, ordered a full-scale attack on the terrorist compound. His forces moved in, neutralizing the threat, but at the cost of civilian casualties, a price he was willing to pay. When the trial ended, the candidates were brought together once more, their actions scrutinized by the public. The world had seen their leadership in action, and now it was up to the voters to decide. Victor stood tall, confident that his calculated approach had shown the world who truly deserved to lead. Alina, despite her setbacks, remained hopeful, knowing that her message of peace would resonate with those who still believed in it. Marcus, ever the warrior, showed no remorse for the lives lost in his pursuit of security, believing that strength was the only thing that could save humanity. The election was only days away, but the world had already seen the future. And now, the choice was theirs.
Welcome to the store. Don't forget to subscribe, and support me.
As humanity spread out across the galaxy, one thing remained constant: the desire for freedom and self-determination. From Earth's humble beginnings to the far reaches of the galaxy, colonies of humans dotted planets, moons, and asteroids, each one striving to forge its own path while remaining part of the grand experiment known as the Interstellar United States, IUS. But, as diversity in culture, politics, and biology took root on new worlds, the challenge of finding a leader to represent everyone grew more complicated. Now, in this pivotal election, the future of the IUS was at stake. The election had attracted the attention of the entire galaxy. Broadcasts of the candidates' rallies, debates, and campaign stops streamed on every screen from the core planets of the IUS to the most distant outposts. On Earth, the cradle of human civilization, Amelia Royce, a tall, statuesque woman with a confident air and warm smile, stood in front of a packed crowd. Her message was simple: unity. "We are one people," she declared, her voice amplified by speakers and carried through the crowd. "Human or alien, earthborn or not, our shared destiny is intertwined. If we are to thrive, we must embrace our diversity and come together." Cheers erupted from her supporters, a sea of placards and digital banners waving in the air. Amelia's charisma was undeniable, and her progressive platform had gained traction among those who still believed in the ideals of a united galaxy. But not everyone was swayed by her vision. In the Outer Rim worlds, far from the influence of Earth and its allies, a different message was resonating. Draxus Thorn, a politician from Calyx, one of the most influential alien planets, stood in a dimly lit hall before a group of alien dignitaries. His skin shimmered with a silver hue, reflecting the low light as his deep-set eyes scanned the room. Draxus was an imposing figure, both physically and politically. His campaign platform promised independence for the outer planets, freedom from what he called the Earth-centric dominance of the IUS. "We have been treated like second-class citizens for too long," Draxus said, his voice deep and resonant. "The time has come for the outer worlds to take control of their own destiny. We will no longer be pawns in Earth's political games." Nods of agreement rippled through the crowd. Many of the outer worlds, especially those dominated by non-human species, had long felt marginalized by the policies of the central IUS government. Draxus' promise of independence struck a chord with those who had grown weary of Earth's influence. Meanwhile, on Mars, a colony known for its technological prowess and economic might, Jasper Wu was addressing a group of corporate leaders. Shorter than his competitors and with a more pragmatic demeanor, Jasper had built his campaign on promises of technological advancement and economic growth. He appealed to the industrialists, the engineers, and those who believed that the future of the IUS lay in innovation rather than diplomacy. "Look around you," Jasper said, gesturing to the towering factories and research facilities that dominated the Martian landscape. "This is the future. We are the engine that drives the IUS forward. With the right leadership, we can take our technological capabilities to new heights and ensure our place as the most powerful force in the galaxy." His words were met with applause from the assembled corporate elites, who saw in Jasper the opportunity to expand their influence even further. For them, the future was a competition, and Mars had always been ahead of the curve. The three candidates represented vastly different visions for the future of the IUS, and the campaign had become a battle for the soul of the galaxy. Each candidate had their strengths, but each also faced challenges that would test their ability to lead such a diverse and sprawling entity. The first debate, held in a neutral zone aboard the massive space station Aurora's Hope, was a highly anticipated event. The station itself floated in the void of space, a glittering beacon of diplomacy that housed representatives from every corner of the galaxy. Its halls were filled with a mix of human and alien species, each one eagerly awaiting the spectacle of the debate. Amelia, Draxus, and Jasper stood on a raised platform before a holographic audience that spanned the galaxy. As the debate began, the candidates quickly laid out their platforms. "I believe in unity," Amelia said, her voice calm but firm. "We are stronger together than apart. The IUS is not just a collection of planets, it is a shared dream of a future where all beings, human and alien alike, can prosper. My administration will focus on strengthening the bonds between our worlds and ensuring that no one is left behind." Draxus was quick to counter. "Unity is a noble goal, but it cannot come at the cost of freedom. The outer worlds have long been treated as pawns in Earth's game of galactic dominance. My people are tired of being told what to do by a distant government that doesn't understand their needs. I will fight for the independence of the outer worlds, so that they can determine their own futures." Jasper, ever the technocrat, took a more measured approach. "Both unity and independence have their merits, but the real key to our future lies in innovation. The IUS must embrace the cutting-edge technologies that will allow us to thrive in this galaxy. My administration will focus on advancing our scientific capabilities, improving our infrastructure, and ensuring that we remain the most powerful economic force in the galaxy." The debate raged on for hours, with each candidate scoring points with their respective supporters. But as the debate concluded, it was clear that the election would not be decided by rhetoric alone. Each candidate would need to secure the trust of key factions across the galaxy, and that would require more than just words. Amelia knew that to win, she would need to form alliances with the smaller, independent worlds that had been neglected by the central government. These worlds were home to a mix of human and alien populations, each one with its own unique culture and challenges. She began traveling to these distant planets, meeting with local leaders and listening to their concerns. On the planet Ithera, a lush world known for its vibrant ecosystems and diverse alien species, Amelia met with the leader of the Federation of Free Planets, a coalition of independent worlds that had long resisted central authority. The leader, a tall, slender alien named Xylo, was skeptical of Amelia's promises of unity. "We have heard these promises before," Xylo said, his voice a series of clicks and hisses that Amelia's translator converted into human language. "Unity always comes at a price. What can you offer us that others have not?" Amelia smiled, her eyes meeting Xylo's. "I offer you a seat at the table. The IUS is changing, and we need voices like yours to guide that change. I'm not here to dictate terms, I'm here to listen and to ensure that your people have a say in their own future." Xylo considered her words carefully, and after a tense moment, he nodded. "Very well, Amelia Royce. We will support your campaign, but know this: if you break your promises, we will not hesitate to leave the IUS." As Amelia secured the support of the Federation of Free Planets, Draxus was busy consolidating his power in the Outer Rim. He had formed an alliance with the Xel'Naga, a powerful alien race known for their control of a critical trade route. This alliance gave Draxus a significant advantage, but it also raised suspicions among human voters, who feared that Draxus was more interested in serving alien interests than in protecting humanity. Meanwhile, Jasper's campaign was struggling. His focus on technological advancement had won him the support of Mars and other industrial planets, but he was seen as too cold and detached by many voters. In a bid to turn the tide, Jasper made a bold move. He struck a deal with the Technocrat Consortium, a powerful corporate entity that controlled the AI systems used throughout the galaxy. With their help, Jasper gained access to advanced data analytics, allowing him to micro-target voters with unprecedented precision. Jasper's new strategy, while effective in boosting his polling numbers, came at a cost. As more information surfaced about his reliance on the Technocrat Consortium, whispers of corruption began to spread. People started to wonder whether Jasper had sold out to corporate interests. On the Outer Worlds, where mistrust of centralized authority ran deep, his campaign suffered a sharp decline. Though Jasper still held strong support among industrialized planets, his base was no longer expanding. In contrast, Amelia's message of unity was starting to resonate with more voters. The endorsement from the Federation of Free Planets had given her a critical boost, particularly in the neutral territories. Her campaign trail became a spectacle of energy and hope, with each rally filled with diverse supporters, humans and aliens alike, chanting her name. Still, the road to victory was far from clear. She had to counter Draxus's growing influence in the Outer Rim, where his calls for independence were turning planets against the idea of a unified galaxy. Draxus, ever the cunning strategist, had anticipated the growing resistance to his alien alliances among human voters. He pivoted his message subtly, emphasizing the need for strong leadership to protect the IUS from external threats. It was a message designed to stoke fear, and it worked. His campaign gained momentum on worlds vulnerable to pirate raids and lawlessness, where safety and stability trumped abstract ideals like unity. Tensions continued to escalate as election day neared. Reports of violence broke out on several planets, as opposing supporters clashed in the streets. On Earth, the heart of the IUS, security forces were deployed in major cities to prevent riots. In the Outer Rim, Draxus's rallies were often interrupted by protests from human groups who viewed him as a traitor. Meanwhile, Jasper's events had grown eerily controlled. His followers moved in sync, their every action seemingly coordinated by the AI systems guiding his campaign. Then came the attack that IT started on Dorson V, a neutral planet known for its role in interstellar diplomacy. A massive explosion rocked the capital city, killing hundreds and sending shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The culprit was unknown, but conspiracy theories flooded the galactic networks. Some blamed alien separatists, others pointed to rogue human factions unhappy with the current election process. The candidates were forced to respond. Amelia was the first to speak publicly. Standing before a holographic display of the destruction on Dorson V, she made an impassioned plea for peace. "This violence only serves to divide us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We must not let fear and hatred tear apart the fabric of our galaxy. The people of Dorson V deserve justice, but they also deserve our commitment to unity and peace." Her words struck a chord with many, but there were those who felt they were not enough. Draxus, always quick to exploit a crisis, took a different approach. He framed the attack as evidence that the IUS was failing to protect its citizens, particularly in the Outer Rim. "This is exactly why we need independence," he thundered in a speech broadcast across the galaxy. "We cannot rely on a distant government to protect us. The outer worlds must stand on their own, free to defend themselves without interference from Earth." Jasper, true to form, proposed a technological solution. He called for an immediate deployment of AI security systems across all planets in the IUS to prevent future attacks. The tragedy on Dorson V could have been avoided with the proper safeguards in place, he said in a cold, matter-of-fact tone. "My administration will ensure that every planet has access to the technology necessary to prevent such acts of terror." But as the investigation into the attack continued, an unsettling truth emerged. It wasn't a separatist group or rogue faction behind the explosion, it was an inside job. A faction within the IUS government had orchestrated the attack to influence the election, hoping to manipulate public fear into a tighter, more authoritarian grip on power. The revelation sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy, shaking the foundations of the election itself. The candidates found themselves in an unexpected alliance. Amelia, Draxus, and Jasper joined forces temporarily to expose the conspiracy. It was an uneasy truce, but necessary. Together, they revealed the faction's plans to the galaxy, exposing the culprits and ensuring they were brought to justice. The exposure of the conspiracy brought a moment of collective relief to the galaxy, but it didn't ease the political tension. If anything, it made the stakes of the election even higher. With the shadow of corruption looming over the central government, the candidates returned to their campaigns with renewed urgency. The final days before Election Day were a whirlwind of rallies, speeches, and last-minute attempts to sway undecided voters. Draxus leaned into his message of strength and independence, emphasizing that only he could protect the outer worlds from the central government's overreach. Amelia continued to champion unity, urging voters not to give in to fear or division. Jasper, while bruised by the AI scandal, pressed forward with his vision of a technologically driven future, trying to salvage what was left of his support base. Election Day arrived, and the galaxy held its breath. The votes were cast, and as the results began to trickle in, it became clear that this would be the closest election in the history of the IUS. Draxus won handily in the Outer Rim, securing the vote of most alien planets and human colonies that favored independence. Amelia dominated the inner planets, with Earth and its allies turning out in overwhelming numbers to support her. Jasper, despite the controversy surrounding his campaign, managed to secure a significant portion of the industrial and technologically advanced planets, but neither Draxus nor Amelia had secured enough votes to win outright. The deciding factor would come down to the neutral planets, the same planets that had been swayed by Amelia's promises of inclusion and representation. On these worlds, the population was deeply divided. Many still remembered Amelia's diplomacy and her ability to bring people together, but others feared that unity would come at the cost of their autonomy. The final vote came in from Zerones, the largest of the neutral planets. It was the tipping point, and the moment every citizen in the galaxy had been waiting for. Amelia's heart raced as the numbers flashed across the screen. Amelia Royce had won. But by the slimmest of margins, the announcement sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Some celebrated, seeing her victory as a triumph for unity and diplomacy. Others were less enthusiastic, fearing that Amelia's presidency would mark the beginning of Earth's dominance over the galaxy. Draxus accepted his defeat with cold detachment, though he vowed to continue fighting for the independence of the outer worlds. Jasper, ever the pragmatist, congratulated Amelia and offered his assistance in shaping the technological future of the IUS, but Amelia knew her work was just beginning. The election had been won, but the galaxy remained fractured. The people were divided, and the scars of the campaign, especially the attack on Dorson V, had left deep wounds. As she stood before a holographic projection of the galaxy, the weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders. She had promised to unite the IUS, to represent not just Earth but every planet, every species, every culture in the galaxy. It was a monumental task, and one that would take years, if not decades, to accomplish. In her inaugural speech, Amelia spoke directly to the people of the galaxy, her voice resolute but humble. "We are not just a collection of planets," she said. "We are a collective dream of what the future can be. A future where our differences make us stronger, where our diversity is our greatest asset. I do not promise an easy road ahead, but I promise that I will fight every day to ensure that the interstellar United States remains a beacon of hope for all." The galaxy listened, and for a moment, there was a fragile peace. Whether that peace would last, only time would tell. But for now, Amelia Royce was the leader of the interstellar United States, and the galaxy watched as she began the monumental task of bringing it together.
Welcome to the store. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
The year was 2048, and the lines between reality and the digital world were no longer blurred, they were obliterated. The American presidential election had evolved into something no one could have predicted 50 years ago. Gone were the days of debates and town halls. Now, voters could step into a virtual world, one crafted by each candidate, and experience the future they promised. It was a system built on trust, on the idea that technology would enhance democracy, not hinder it. But technology, like power, could be twisted. Daniel Reeves sat in his campaign office, staring at the digital projections that floated above his desk. The numbers were close, closer than anyone had expected. He wasn't supposed to have a chance. He was an outsider, a candidate who built his platform on transparency, equality, and reform in a world dominated by corporate interests. His opponent, Margaret Cross, was everything he wasn't: polished, well-funded, and backed by powerful corporate entities that practically owned the political landscape. But Daniel had something Margaret didn't: the people. As the son of a former political dissident, Daniel had learned from an early age the importance of fighting for those without a voice. His campaign had gained traction because he spoke directly to the voters, not through corporate-sponsored ads, but through the immersive virtual reality simulations that had become the cornerstone of modern elections. In a few days, voters would step into the virtual election system and experience firsthand the futures that Daniel and Margaret were offering. Each simulation was a meticulously crafted representation of the candidate's policies and visions. Voters would live in these virtual futures for hours, even days, experiencing the world through the lens of each candidate's promises. It was the ultimate test. What kind of world would you choose? Daniel leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The pressure was mounting. He knew Margaret's team had resources beyond his wildest imagination, but he trusted the election system. It had been hailed as foolproof, secure, unhackable, transparent. Every voter would see the truth, or so he believed. The message alert on his wristband blinked, drawing his attention. Elena, his technical advisor, had sent a priority message. Daniel, something's wrong with the sim. He frowned, tapping the wristband to open the message in full. Elena's face appeared in front of him, her expression grim. There's a glitch in your future simulation. I don't know how to explain it, but when I ran a test this morning, the experience was off. Parts of the future were distorted. You need to come to the sim room. Daniel felt a knot form in his stomach. A glitch? That couldn't be right. The system was supposed to be flawless. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the simulation room, a sleek, high-tech space on the lower level of his campaign headquarters. When he arrived, Elena was already there, her fingers flying across the control panel. What's going on? He asked, his voice tight. Elena didn't look up from the console. I ran a final check on the sim this morning to make sure everything was ready for the election. But when I entered your simulation, your vision of the future, something felt off. The environment was unstable, and some of the experiences were warped. Warped how? Your policies, your promises, they weren't being represented accurately. Instead of the future you've been advocating for, voters would experience something chaotic, dystopian even. Daniel's mind raced. That doesn't make sense. We built this simulation from the ground up. It's been tested 100 times. Elena turned to face him, her expression grave. I think someone's tampered with the system. Tampered? You're telling me someone hacked the election simulation? She nodded. That's exactly what I'm saying. Daniel's stomach twisted. The virtual election system was supposed to be unhackable. It was designed to be the most secure voting method ever conceived, a system that would eliminate fraud and manipulation. But if someone had managed to breach it, we need to find out who did this and fix it, Daniel said, pacing the room. We're only days away from the election. If voters experience a distorted version of my future, they'll never vote for me. This could swing the entire race. Elena nodded, already typing furiously on the console. I'm working on tracking the source of the glitch. But this is advanced. Whoever did this is no amateur. Daniel stopped pacing and stared at the simulation pod in the center of the room. It looked like any other high-end VR system, a sleek, black capsule designed to immerse the user in a fully virtual environment. But inside that pod was his future, the future he wanted to offer the American people. And someone was trying to take that away from him. Let me in, Daniel said, his voice steady. Elena looked up, confused. What? Let me into the sim. I want to see it for myself. Elena hesitated. Daniel, it's not safe. If the system's been compromised, we don't know what could happen inside. I need to see it, Daniel insisted. If we don't fix this, the election is over. Reluctantly, Elena nodded and began preparing the pod. Daniel stepped inside, lying back as the capsule's lid slowly closed over him. The world around him faded, replaced by the immersive hum of the virtual reality interface. Within moments, he was no longer in the campaign headquarters. He was standing in his future. At first, everything seemed normal. He was in a bright, open city, a vision of the clean, sustainable future he had promised during his campaign. The air was crisp, the sky a perfect shade of blue, and the people around him moved with purpose, smiling as they went about their day. It was exactly how he had imagined it, a world of equality, where technology served the people, not corporations. But then, slowly, the world began to change. A subtle distortion rippled through the environment, and the buildings around him started to shift. The clean, futuristic architecture warped, becoming jagged and menacing. The sky darkened, and the smiling faces of the people twisted into grimaces of fear and anger. It was as if the very essence of his future was being corrupted. Daniel's heart raced as he realized what was happening. The simulation was being altered in real time. Someone, no, something, was rewriting his future, turning it into a nightmare that he tried to navigate through the warped environment, but every step he took only seemed to make things worse. The streets crumbled beneath his feet, and the once clear sky filled with ominous clouds. Voices echoed around him, disjointed and haunting, whispering words of doubt and fear. Daniel reached for the console embedded in his wrist, the emergency exit that would pull him out of the sim, but the interface was unresponsive. Whoever had tampered with the system had locked him in. Elena, he called out, knowing she couldn't hear him. Get me out of here. But there was no response. He was alone in a twisted version of his own creation, trapped in a nightmare that wasn't his. As he stumbled through the distorted city, he saw a figure in the distance. It was standing at the edge of a crumbling skyscraper, watching him. Daniel squinted, trying to make out who, or what, it was. The figure was shrouded in shadows, but there was something unmistakably familiar about it. Who are you? Daniel called out, his voice echoing through the warped environment. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised its hand, and with a single gesture, the entire city collapsed around Daniel. The ground beneath him gave way, and he fell into darkness. Daniel jolted awake, gasping for breath. The simulation pod's lid had opened, and Elena stood over him, her face pale with worry. You were unresponsive for a full minute, she said, her voice tight. What happened in there? Daniel sat up, his heart pounding in his chest. The warped city, the shadowy figure, it all felt too real. He wiped the sweat from his brow and tried to steady his breathing. I saw it, he said, his voice hoarse. The future I've been promising, it was being corrupted. Twisted into something dark. Someone's inside the system, Elena. They're controlling it. Elena crossed her arms, her expression serious. I ran diagnostics while you were in there. There's a piece of foreign code embedded deep within the election system. It's not just affecting your simulation, it's targeting you specifically. And it's sophisticated. Whoever did this is good. Really good. Daniel clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. We need to find out who's behind this and stop them. If this gets out, my campaign is finished. Elena nodded. I've already started tracing the code. It's heavily encrypted, but I have a lead. There's a hacker known as the Architect. He's a ghost in the system, a legend among programmers. If anyone could pull this off, it's him. The Architect, Daniel muttered. The name felt ominous, like something pulled from a bad science fiction novel. How do we find him? Elena pulled up a virtual interface in front of her, rapidly typing commands. There's a way. I can set up a direct link to his code. But it's risky. If we go in, we'll be diving headfirst into his territory. We won't just be fighting his code, we'll be fighting him. Daniel stood, determination hardening his features. Set it up. We don't have a choice. Within minutes, Elena had modified the simulation pod. Daniel climbed back in, bracing himself as the lid closed over him once again. This time, there was no clean transition into the simulation. The moment the pod engaged, he was thrown into a swirling void of code, data streaming past him like a digital storm. He wasn't in his future anymore. He was inside the architect's world. The environment solidified around him, forming into a massive, chaotic cityscape. The buildings were jagged and angular, made of shifting code that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The sky above was a dark, roiling mass of static, and the ground beneath his feet felt unstable, as if it could disappear at any moment. "Elena, can you hear me?" Daniel called out. A moment later, her voice crackled in through his earpiece. "I'm here. You're in deep now, Daniel. Be careful." Daniel scanned the city around him, looking for any sign of movement. He knew the architect was here somewhere, watching him. This was his domain, a digital fortress built to hide his true identity and protect his malicious code. Daniel began walking, his steps cautious but deliberate. The city felt hostile, like it was alive and aware of his presence. As he moved deeper into the heart of the simulation, he could feel the architect's gaze on him, an ever-present force that seemed to be testing his every move. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath him, and the buildings around him began to warp, twisting into grotesque shapes. A figure appeared in front of him, materializing from the shadows. It was the same figure he had seen earlier, standing on the edge of the skyscraper. But now, up close, Daniel could see him clearly. The architect was tall, his form shrouded in a long, black cloak made of swirling code. His face was obscured by a mask, smooth and featureless, save for two glowing red eyes that burned with intensity. "Daniel Reeves," the architect said, his voice distorted and metallic. "I've been expecting you." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "You're the one corrupting the election system. Why? What do you gain from this?" The architect tilted his head, his voice laced with condescension. "Gain? It's not about gain, Daniel. It's about control. The system you put so much faith in is a lie. It's flawed, vulnerable. I'm simply exposing the truth." "You're not exposing anything," Daniel shot back. "You're manipulating people. You're stealing their choice." The architect chuckled darkly. "Choice? There is no choice in a system as corrupt as this. Your election was never going to be fair. The corporations, the elites, they control everything. I'm just tipping the scales in a different direction." Daniel took a step forward, his fists clenched. "You're working for Margaret Cross, aren't you?" The architect's red eyes flared. "I work for no one. But Cross's vision aligns with mine. A world where the strong rule, where the weak are culled. It's inevitable, Daniel. And you? You're just in the way." Before Daniel could respond, the ground beneath him erupted, and he was thrown into the air. He landed hard on his back, gasping for breath as the architect's laughter echoed around him. "You can't win, Daniel," the architect sneered. "This is my world. I control everything here." Daniel struggled to his feet, his mind racing. The architect was right, this was his domain, and he had complete control. But Daniel wasn't ready to give up. He knew there had to be a way to fight back. "Elena," he whispered into his earpiece, "I need options. How do I beat him?" Elena's voice crackled back, urgent. "The architect's control is tied to his code. If you can find the source of his power, you can destabilize him. But you'll have to get past his defenses first." "Where's the source?" Daniel asked, scanning the environment. It's buried deep in the heart of the simulation. I'm sending you the coordinates now. But be careful, he'll throw everything he has at you. Daniel nodded, determination settling in his chest. I'm ready. He began running, navigating the chaotic city as the architect's voice boomed around him. You can run, Daniel, but you can't hide. You're just a bug in my system, and I'll squash you like the rest. The ground shifted beneath him, and massive digital constructs began to rise from the earth, hulking creatures made of code, their eyes glowing with malevolence. They charged at Daniel, their footsteps shaking the ground as they moved with terrifying speed. Daniel dodged the first creature's swipe, narrowly avoiding its massive claws. He ducked behind a crumbling building, his mind racing. He needed to reach the source of the architect's power, but these constructs were relentless. Elena, I need more time, he muttered, catching his breath. I'm working on it, she replied, her voice tense. I'm sending a virus into the system to slow him down, but it won't last long. Daniel sprinted down a narrow alley, the towering constructs close behind him. As he ran, he felt a surge of energy ripple through the simulation. The constructs faltered, their movements slowing as Elena's virus began to take effect. This is it, he thought, pushing himself harder. I can end this. He reached the center of the simulation, a massive structure made of shifting code. It pulsed with a strange, otherworldly energy, the heart of the architect's power. Daniel approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the architect's presence all around him, watching, waiting. Do you really think you can defeat me? The architect's voice echoed. You're nothing, Daniel. Just a man trying to fight a system too big for him. Daniel ignored the taunts and reached out, placing his hand on the pulsing structure. The moment his fingers touched the code, the entire simulation began to tremble. The architect's world was unraveling. No, the architect roared, his voice filled with fury. You don't know what you're doing. Daniel gritted his teeth, focusing all his energy on destabilizing the code. The ground shook violently, and the sky above began to crack, shards of static raining down like shattered glass. Suddenly, the architect appeared in front of him, his red eyes blazing with rage. You can't stop this. Daniel didn't flinch. Watch me. With a final push, Daniel tore through the architect's code, and the entire simulation collapsed in on itself. The architect's form flickered and then vanished, his scream of frustration echoing into the void as everything went black. Daniel awoke in the simulation pod, gasping for air. The lid had opened, and Elena stood over him, her face a mixture of relief and disbelief. You did it, she whispered. Daniel sat up, his body trembling from the intensity of the experience. Is it over? Elena nodded. The architect's code is gone. The election system is secure again. Daniel closed his eyes, letting out a long breath. He had won. The integrity of the election was restored, and now, the people would see the truth. As he stood, he glanced at the simulation pod one last time. The architect was gone, but Daniel knew that the battle for control of the digital world was far from over.
Welcome to the store. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
In the not-so-distant future, the world had become something unrecognizable. Freedom, once the cornerstone of democracy, had been replaced with a tightly controlled illusion of choice. Election results were predetermined by the ruling regime, and the people, every man, woman, and child, were nothing more than puppets, moved by invisible strings. The government controlled not just the media or the flow of information, but even the thoughts of its citizens. They had perfected mind control, using advanced nanotechnology to manipulate the population's neural pathways, ensuring complete compliance with their every whim. It was a world devoid of hope, where the illusion of democracy pacified the masses, but where true freedom had long since been forgotten. Ethan was no different from the rest of them. He lived a life of quiet submission, unaware of the control exerted over his mind. He worked in a drab, windowless office, crunching meaningless numbers for an unknown cause, his life slipping by in a blur of monotony. Like everyone else, Ethan believed in the system, in the stability and peace it offered. He believed his vote mattered, that he had a say in the direction of the world. But deep down, in some unspoken corner of his mind, there was a small, nagging doubt, an inkling that something wasn't quite right. It was during one of his evening walks through the city when the first crack in his carefully controlled reality appeared. The streets were lined with glowing holographic billboards, projecting images of the smiling candidates for the upcoming election. They promised prosperity, safety, and a better future. Ethan barely glanced at them, as he had seen the same faces plastered across every surface for months. But tonight, something was different. As he passed by a darkened alleyway, he caught sight of a flicker of movement, something out of place amidst the sterile order of the city. Curiosity got the better of him, and he stepped into the shadows, drawn by the strange sight. There, on the wall of the alley, was an image unlike any of the government propaganda. It was a message, scrawled in bright red letters, hastily sprayed in defiance of the pristine order of the city. Freedom is a choice. Wake up. Before Ethan could fully process the words, a voice spoke from the darkness behind him. You're not supposed to be here. He spun around, heart racing, to see a woman emerge from the shadows. She was about his age, with short, dark hair and a determined look in her eyes. Don't worry, she said quickly. I'm not here to hurt you. I just wanted to see if you'd noticed. Noticed what? Ethan asked, still feeling off balance. The lie, she said, stepping closer. The world you think you know is nothing but a carefully constructed illusion. The elections, the government, everything, it's all controlled. Ethan frowned. Controlled? What are you talking about? The woman sighed, glancing around to make sure no one else was watching. They've been controlling your mind, Ethan. All of us. The government uses nanotechnology to manipulate our thoughts, to make us believe we're free, when in reality, we're just slaves to their will. Ethan stared at her, unable to comprehend what she was saying. That's insane. Is it? She asked. Or is it insane that you've never once questioned the system? Never once doubted why everything always seems to work out in favor of the same people, year after year? Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but something stopped him. That nagging feeling, the sense that something wasn't right, it all came rushing to the surface. Who are you? He asked finally. My name is Sophia, she said. And I'm part of a group that's fighting back. We call ourselves the Free Will Alliance. We've developed a way to undo the government's control, to give people their minds back. And we need your help. Ethan laughed, a short, nervous sound. You're crazy. I don't know who you are, but I know it's hard to believe, Sophia interrupted, but what if I told you there's a way to prove it? What if I told you we can free your mind, right now? Ethan hesitated. How? Nanotech, she said simply. Just like the government uses to control you, we've developed our own nanobots that can neutralize theirs. It's completely safe, and once it's done, you'll be able to think clearly again. You'll be free. He wanted to walk away, to dismiss her as some conspiracy theorist, but something in her eyes gave him pause. She didn't seem crazy. She seemed desperate. And more than that, she seemed sincere. "Why me?" he asked. Sophia smiled, a faint glimmer of hope in her expression. "Because I've been watching you. You're not like the others. You still have that spark, that sense that something's wrong. You're not fully lost to them yet." Ethan swallowed, his heart pounding in his chest. This was insane. It was impossible. And yet, that small voice inside him, the one that had been whispering all along, urged him to listen. "What do I have to do?" he asked finally. "Come with me," she said, extending her hand. The process took place in a small, dimly lit room, far from the watchful eyes of the regime. Sophia and her fellow Alliance members guided Ethan through every step, explaining how the nanobots they implanted would overwrite the government's control and restore his free will. As the machine hummed to life and the procedure began, Ethan felt a strange sensation in his mind, as though a fog was lifting, revealing the world in a clarity he had never known. When it was over, he opened his eyes, and everything was different. The city outside, once a blur of propaganda and order, now seemed false. The bright holographic billboards, the smiling candidates, the perfectly clean streets, it all felt wrong, like a stage set up to distract from the truth. For the first time in his life, Ethan saw the world for what it was, a prison masquerading as a utopia. "You see it now, don't you?" Sophia asked, watching him closely. Ethan nodded slowly, still trying to process the flood of new thoughts racing through his mind. "It's all a lie," he whispered. "Yes," she said softly. "And now you understand why we're fighting. Why we have to wake up as many people as we can before it's too late." Over the next few weeks, Ethan became a part of the Free Will Alliance, working alongside Sophia and others who had been freed from the regime's control. They operated in secret, moving from one hidden location to another, spreading their message to those who, like Ethan, showed signs of questioning the system. It was dangerous work. The government had eyes and ears everywhere, but the Alliance was careful. They used encrypted communications and constantly changed their meeting spots to avoid detection. Ethan threw himself into the cause with a newfound sense of purpose. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was part of something real, something that mattered. He trained with the Alliance, learning how to hack into the government systems, how to disable the mind control technology, and how to stay one step ahead of the regime's relentless surveillance. Sophia became his closest ally, guiding him through the complexities of their rebellion. She was fierce, determined, and driven by a deep belief in the possibility of a better future, a future where people could think and choose for themselves. Ethan admired her strength, and as they spent more time together, he began to feel something more than just admiration, but there was little time for personal feelings. The election was fast approaching, and the Alliance knew they had to act soon if they wanted to make a difference. The government had already selected their puppet candidates, and the entire election process was nothing more than a farce designed to maintain the illusion of democracy. The people would vote, just as they always had, but the outcome had already been decided unless the Alliance could stop it. Ethan found himself sitting in a dimly lit room, surrounded by the key members of the Alliance as they discussed their plan for the upcoming election. Sophia stood at the front, outlining the details with a determined look on her face. "We've managed to infiltrate several of the government's key systems," she said, pointing to a holographic map of the city. "But the real challenge will be disabling the mind control nanobots on a large enough scale to make a difference. We've tested the tech." Marcus, one of the Alliance's top hackers, chimed in. "It works, but we need to get it to as many people as possible before Election Day." Ethan frowned, leaning forward. "How are we going to do that? The regime controls all the communication networks." Sophia nodded grimly. "That's why we need to go after their control centers. If we can disable the main hub where they distribute the nanobots, we can stop them from controlling the vote." It was a risky plan, but it was the only one they had. Ethan sat in silence, absorbing the gravity of what they were planning. It wasn't just an election anymore. This was the moment where everything would either fall apart or change forever. If they failed, the government would clamp down harder than ever before, and the chance of any real freedom might be lost for generations. If they succeeded, they could ignite a spark that would set the whole world free. The plan was simple in theory: infiltrate the central nanotech control hub, shut down the mind control network, and give people back their ability to think for themselves. But executing it was anything but simple. The control hub was deep underground, heavily fortified, and constantly monitored by the regime's most loyal soldiers. It was a fortress, and they had to find a way in without raising suspicion. Over the following days, Ethan and Sophia worked tirelessly to gather intelligence and prepare the team for the operation. Marcus, with his technical expertise, managed to secure access codes that would allow them to bypass some of the outer defenses. Meanwhile, Ethan and Sophia assembled a group of trusted Alliance members who would be responsible for carrying out the mission. Every detail had to be perfect. There would be no second chances. On the night of the operation, the air was thick with tension. The group gathered in a safe house on the outskirts of the city, where they reviewed the plan one last time. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just another mission, this was the mission. The future of their entire cause rested on what they were about to do. "We're ready," Sophia said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying the nerves she was trying to suppress. Ethan nodded, glancing around at the others. There were a dozen of them, all armed with the tools and technology they needed to take down the hub. Each of them had their own reason for being there. Some had lost family members to the regime, others had simply grown tired of living under a lie. But they all shared the same hope, that this could be the moment when everything changed. The group moved swiftly through the dark streets, avoiding the government patrols that roamed the city. They were heading toward the industrial district, where the central hub was located beneath a massive, nondescript building that, to the outside world, appeared to be nothing more than a data processing center. But they knew the truth. As they approached the perimeter, Marcus worked quickly to disable the external security systems, giving them a brief window of time to slip through unnoticed. Ethan's heart raced as they moved in, every step bringing them closer to the point of no return. There was no turning back now. The first part of the plan went smoothly. They entered the building through a service entrance and made their way down into the underground levels, following the schematics Marcus had provided. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The corridors were dimly lit, and the sound of their footsteps echoed eerily off the concrete walls. When they finally reached the control room, it was eerily quiet. The air buzzed with the hum of machinery, but there was no sign of any guards. Marcus moved to the control panel, fingers flying over the keyboard as he worked to bypass the final layer of security. "Almost there," he muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. Ethan and Sophia stood nearby, keeping watch for any sign of trouble. But the longer they waited, the more uneasy Ethan felt. Something wasn't right. It was too quiet, too easy, and then, just as Marcus was about to break through the last firewall, the door to the control room slid open with a hiss. Before anyone could react, armed soldiers poured into the room, weapons raised. Ethan's heart sank. They'd been caught. "Hands up," barked the lead soldier, his face hidden behind a visor. No one moves. The Alliance members froze, exchanging tense glances. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and outgunned. Ethan clenched his fists, cursing himself for not seeing this coming. The regime had been one step ahead of them all along. Sophia stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "We don't want any trouble," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We're just here to..." "Silence," the soldier snapped. He gestured to two of his men. "Take them." As the soldiers moved to apprehend the group, Marcus suddenly sprang into action. He slammed his hand down on the control panel, triggering a massive surge of energy that fried the entire system. The lights flickered, and the hum of the machines grew louder before abruptly cutting out. In the confusion, Ethan and the others seized the moment to fight back. Chaos erupted in the control room. Gunfire rang out as the Alliance members clashed with the soldiers, using whatever they could find as weapons. Ethan fought with a desperation he hadn't known he possessed, grappling with one of the soldiers and managing to knock his weapon free. He didn't hesitate, grabbing the gun and firing at the nearest enemy. The battle was brief but brutal. When it was over, the room was littered with the bodies of both soldiers and Alliance members. Ethan, panting heavily, looked around at the devastation. Marcus was slumped against the control panel, blood seeping from a wound in his side. Sophia rushed to his side, her hands shaking as she tried to stop the bleeding. "Marcus, hang on," she pleaded, but Marcus shook his head, his face pale and drawn. I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't mean for this to happen." Ethan knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. "What do you mean?" Marcus coughed weakly, his eyes filled with regret. They knew. They knew everything. I gave them the codes." Sophia's eyes widened in shock. "You what?" I didn't have a choice," Marcus gasped. "They threatened my family. I thought I could give them just enough to keep them off our backs, but I didn't know they'd come for all of us." Ethan felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a deep, aching sadness. Marcus had betrayed them, but he had also paid the price. There was no time for blame, no time for anything except moving forward. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Then, without another word, she stood up and turned to Ethan. "We have to finish this." Ethan nodded grimly. They had lost too many people, sacrificed too much to turn back now. With Marcus's dying confession hanging heavy in the air, Ethan and Sophia took over at the control panel. The damage Marcus had caused was extensive, but it wasn't enough. The nanobot network was still operational, and the government's control over the population remained intact. "We need to take out the main server," Sophia said, her voice tight with determination. "If we destroy that, the entire system will collapse." Ethan looked at the schematics on the screen. The main server was located in a heavily fortified chamber deeper underground. Getting to it would be nearly impossible, but they didn't have a choice. They gathered the remaining members of the team and pressed forward, descending into the lower levels of the facility. The corridors grew narrower and more claustrophobic the further they went, and the tension in the air was palpable. They knew they were walking into a death trap, but there was no turning back. When they reached the server chamber, they found it guarded by a squad of heavily armed soldiers. The ensuing battle was fierce, but the Alliance fought with everything they had, knowing that this was their last chance. In the end, they managed to overpower the guards and breach the server room. Inside, the massive server tower loomed before them, a pulsating monolith of data and control. This was it, the heart of the regime's power, Ethan and Sophia moved quickly, planting the explosives they had brought with them. As they worked, Ethan's mind raced with the enormity of what they were about to do. This wasn't just about the election anymore. This was about giving people back their lives, their freedom. With the charges set, they retreated to a safe distance. Ethan glanced at Sophia, who nodded. "Do it." He pressed the detonator. The explosion rocked the facility, sending a shockwave through the corridors. The server tower collapsed in on itself, sparks flying as the entire system shut down. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, the sound of alarms filled the air. Ethan and Sophia ran, their footsteps echoing in the chaos as they made their escape. They knew the government's forces would be closing in on them, but they didn't care. They had done it. The regime's control was broken. As they emerged into the night, the city skyline stretched out before them. Ethan could see the holographic billboards flickering, the once smiling faces of the candidates now distorted and fading. The people would soon wake up, free from the government's control for the first time in decades. Sophia turned to him, her eyes filled with hope and exhaustion. "We did it." Ethan nodded, the weight of everything they had been through settling in his chest. "Yeah. We did." The future was uncertain, and the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in his life, Ethan believed that they could build something better. Something real.
Welcome to the store. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
The air on Nova Terra had a subtle scent of fresh earth, a constant reminder that everything here was new, even the soil. Dr. Maria Chen inhaled deeply as she stepped out of her small habitation module, taking in the early morning sun filtering through the towering purple trees. This was a new beginning for humanity, and yet, the echoes of Earth's past clung to them like an unwanted shadow. The colony had been established only 3 years ago, and already the settlers were facing the same old problems. Power struggles, ideological differences, and now the looming election. Maria glanced toward the central dome of the settlement, where people were gathering for the first real debate of the election cycle. She wasn't a politician. She never wanted to be one. She had come here to build something new, not to rehash the mistakes of the past, yet, somehow, she had found herself drawn into the center of it all. Nova Terra was supposed to be different. The first human colony on an alien world, designed from the ground up to be self-sustaining. No Earth-made materials, no reliance on supply drops. Just humanity and its ingenuity, forging a future on a distant world. The planet's ecosystem, though alien, had been meticulously engineered by Maria and her team to support human life. They had brought with them the seeds of Earth, plants, bacteria, animals, but had quickly learned that this world demanded more than just Earth solutions. The Interim Council had done its job well enough for the first few years, keeping things running, but now the settlers wanted real leadership. An elected government, they said, to bring stability and direction. The problem was that no one could agree on what kind of government they needed. Jonas Rain, a former Earth politician, was the frontrunner for the election. Tall, charismatic, and pragmatic to a fault, Jonas had a following of settlers who believed that humanity's old systems, though flawed, were still the best way forward. "We don't need to reinvent the wheel," he had said during one of his rallies. "We just need to learn from our mistakes. Democracy, capitalism, free markets, they've worked for centuries. They can work here, too." Maria wasn't so sure. This world was nothing like Earth. The soil was richer, the climate more stable, but the rules were different. The plants here didn't grow the same way, the atmosphere was thinner, and the seasons were unpredictable. If Nova Terra taught them anything, it was that this was a place of constant adaptation, of change. And that was where Alia Velen came in. Alia was younger than Jonas, but her vision for the future was no less compelling. With her long dark hair and piercing blue eyes, she spoke of a new kind of society, one that was built on equality, transparency, and collective responsibility. This world doesn't have to follow Earth's path, she had declared in a recent debate. We can be something more, something better. We can create a system that's fair, where no one is left behind. And we have the technology to do it. Her plan centered around a hybrid system of governance, where AI would help mediate decisions and resource allocation, ensuring that everyone had what they needed while protecting the planet's fragile ecosystem. It was a bold idea, one that resonated with many of the younger settlers who had come here to escape Earth's broken systems. But it also terrified those who feared losing their autonomy to machines. Maria found herself caught between the two visions. She admired Alia's idealism, but part of her agreed with Jonas. Nova Terra was too unpredictable, too harsh, to leave everything up to a collective system. Yet, the thought of simply repeating Earth's mistakes, of letting capitalism run rampant again, filled her with dread. As she approached the central dome, she could already hear the voices of the crowd inside. The debate was about to begin, and today, the candidates were addressing the most critical issue of all: how to handle the colony's resources, especially after the recent crop failure. The dome was packed, settlers standing shoulder to shoulder, eager to hear what their potential leaders had to say. In the front row, Maria saw Alia and Jonas, each preparing their notes, flanked by their supporters. The energy in the room was palpable, a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Maria slipped into a seat at the back, hoping to remain unnoticed. But as soon as she sat down, a voice behind her whispered, "Dr. Chen, do you think Alia's plan can really work?" She turned to see a young man, one of the agricultural workers, looking at her expectantly. He was one of the many settlers who relied on the colony's fragile ecosystem for survival. His face was etched with worry. Maria gave him a small smile. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I do know we need to find a way to work with this planet, not against it." The debate began with Jonas taking the stage. His deep voice filled the dome, authoritative yet reassuring. "Look," he said, "I understand that people came here to escape the problems of Earth. But the truth is, we can't ignore the lessons we've learned. Free markets drive innovation. Competition pushes us to be better. Without it, we stagnate." He gestured to the crowd. "The crop failure is a perfect example. We need to incentivize people to find solutions, not wait around for a collective to decide. The best and brightest should be rewarded for their efforts. That's how we survive." There was a smattering of applause from his supporters, but the tension in the room was thick. Jonas' words, though practical, felt cold to many who had left Earth behind in search of a new way of life. Alia stepped forward next, her voice calm but full of conviction. "Jonas is right about one thing," she began. "We do need innovation. But innovation doesn't come from competition alone. It comes from collaboration. From people working together for a common goal." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This planet is different from Earth. We can't apply the same rules here. Nova Terra is alive in ways that Earth never was. Its ecosystems are interconnected, fragile. If we don't protect them, we'll lose everything. That's why we need a system that values sustainability over profit. A system where AI can help us monitor and manage resources fairly, without bias or corruption." The applause was louder this time, and Maria noticed the agricultural worker behind her nodding in agreement. Alia's vision was compelling, but it also seemed idealistic. Could they really trust an AI to manage their society? Could they trust each other to act in the collective interest? Maria's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden commotion at the entrance of the dome. A group of engineers rushed in, their faces pale with fear. "There's been an environmental shift," one of them shouted. "The crops, they're dying. Fast." The room erupted into chaos. People stood, shouting questions, demanding answers. Jonas immediately took control, barking orders to his team, while Alia called for calm. But the damage had been done. The crop failure was worse than they thought, and the colony was now facing a potential food shortage. Jonas was the first to address the crisis. "We need to act now," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We have limited resources, and we need to prioritize. Those with the skills to solve this problem should receive the most support. We can't afford to waste time or resources." Alia shook her head, stepping forward. "No," she said firmly. "This is exactly why we need a collective response. We have enough food for now if we ration it properly. Everyone should contribute, and no one should be left behind. We can use the AI to monitor the situation and ensure that resources are distributed fairly." The crowd was split. Some shouted their support for Jonas, while others sided with Alia. It was a microcosm of the larger ideological battle: individualism versus collectivism, profit versus sustainability. Maria felt a knot forming in her stomach. This was more than just a political debate now. The colony's survival was at stake and they were running out of time. Maria stood frozen as the dome filled with panic. The gravity of the situation hit her hard. This wasn't just a political debate anymore, this was survival. The crops had been dying slowly for weeks, but no one had expected the collapse to happen so suddenly, so catastrophically. Jonas and Alia both rushed to their respective teams, each trying to take control of the situation, but neither seemed to have a clear plan. The noise of the crowd only grew louder, the settlers' voices rising in a desperate chorus of fear and confusion. Maria's mind raced. They needed a solution, and they needed it fast. She wasn't a politician, but she was a scientist, and she understood this planet better than anyone. If anyone could figure out how to stabilize the ecosystem, it was her. Without thinking, she pushed through the crowd and climbed onto the stage, stepping between Jonas and Alia. The room quieted, all eyes turning toward her. "We don't have time for this," Maria said, her voice firm. "The ecosystem is collapsing faster than we anticipated. We can debate politics later, but right now, we need to work together if we're going to survive." Jonas looked skeptical, but Alia nodded in agreement. "What do you suggest?" she asked. Maria took a deep breath. "We need to put the ecosystem into stasis. I've been working on a bioengineering project that could slow down the environmental shifts long enough for us to stabilize the crops. But it's going to require resources, and it's going to require cooperation." Jonas crossed his arms. "You want us to bet everything on an experimental procedure?" Maria met his gaze, unflinching. "Do you have a better idea?" There was a long silence as the room held its breath. Finally, Jonas sighed and nodded. "Fine. What do you need?" Maria quickly outlined the plan. They would need to gather specific compounds from the biodome, extract certain enzymes from the local flora, and combine them with Earth-originating bacteria to create a biological buffer that would slow down the degradation of the crops. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was their best shot. Jonas and Alia both mobilized their supporters, sending teams to gather the necessary materials. For the first time in weeks, the colony was working together, united by the shared threat of extinction. Hours passed in a blur as Maria and her team worked frantically in the laboratory, synthesizing the biological buffer. The atmosphere in the colony was tense but focused. People worked side by side, regardless of their political beliefs, driven by the primal need to survive. As the final mixture was prepared, Maria looked up at the faces around her. There was a mixture of hope and fear in their eyes, and she felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. If this didn't work, there might not be another chance. With steady hands, she injected the buffer into the irrigation system, watching as the liquid flowed into the soil, soaking into the roots of the dying crops. The room held its breath as they waited for something, anything, to happen. Minutes passed, and nothing changed. The plants still looked sickly, their leaves withered and yellowed. Maria's heart sank. Had she miscalculated? Was it too late? Just as she was about to lose hope, a soft green glow began to emanate from the plants. It started slowly, then spread across the field as the crops began to pulse with life. The buffer was working. A collective sigh of relief swept through the colony. People began to cheer, hugging one another, their fear momentarily forgotten. They had done it. They had saved the crops, at least for now. Maria slumped against the nearest console, exhaustion washing over her. But there was no time to rest. The buffer was only a temporary solution. They still needed to address the larger problem, how to manage the colony's resources and ensure long-term survival. That evening, a meeting was called in the central dome. The mood was more subdued now, the initial relief tempered by the knowledge that the crisis was far from over. Jonas and Alia stood on opposite sides of the stage, both looking drained but determined. "This isn't over," Jonas said, addressing the crowd. "We may have saved the crops for now, but this planet is unpredictable. We need strong leadership to make sure we're prepared for whatever comes next." Alia stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "What we need is cooperation, not competition." Maria's solution worked because we all came together. That's the kind of leadership this colony needs, a system where everyone has a voice, where resources are shared and managed for the good of all. The debate continued, but something had shifted. The settlers had seen firsthand what they could accomplish when they worked together, and Alia's message of collaboration seemed to resonate more now than it had before. As the meeting came to a close, Maria found herself standing outside the dome, staring up at the alien sky. The stars here were different, unfamiliar, yet beautiful in their own way. She had come to this world to build something new, and maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to do that now. Footsteps approached from behind, and she turned to see Alia standing there, her expression thoughtful. "I wanted to thank you," Alia said quietly. "You saved us today." Maria shook her head. "I didn't do it alone. We all worked together." Alia smiled faintly. "That's the point, isn't it? We can't survive here if we're divided." Maria nodded, her gaze drifting back to the stars. "This planet, it's teaching us something. We can't control it, not like we did on Earth. We have to adapt. And that means changing how we think about everything, our politics, our society, even ourselves." Alia stood beside her in silence for a moment, then said, "I think people are starting to realize that. Slowly, but they're getting there." Maria glanced at her, a question forming in her mind. "Do you think we can really create a new system here? One that's fair, sustainable?" Alia's eyes were bright with determination. "I think we have to try." The next morning, as the sun rose over Nova Terra, the settlers gathered once again for the final vote. The election had become more than just a decision about leadership, it was a choice about the future of their society. Would they cling to the systems of Earth, or would they embrace something new? The votes were tallied slowly, the tension in the air palpable. In the end, the result was almost too close to call. Jonas and Alia had nearly split the colony down the middle. But in a surprising turn, neither candidate emerged as the clear winner. Instead, the settlers chose a compromise. Jonas and Alia would lead together, each bringing their strengths to the table. It wasn't the outcome anyone had expected, but it was one that represented the best of both worlds, a balance between individualism and collectivism, competition and collaboration. As the colony settled into its new rhythm, Maria felt a sense of cautious optimism. They had chosen a path that blended the lessons of the past with the promise of the future. It wouldn't be easy, but then, nothing worth building ever was. The story of Nova Terra had only just begun.